It looks like we've got both teams on. Are we, and it looks, someone is recording. Are we supposed to start?
Your Honor, the defense is ready to proceed.
Well, we didn't realize you were there, or at least I didn't. Welcome. Let me check participants here. All right, is everyone on both teams, is everyone available? I show 25 participants, right?
Yes, sure. From the defense.
Well, then let's get started. How about that? I have a script here. I'm sure going through your state competitions, you heard the script many times. They're all very similar, but I'm going to go down each and every point. And the first one is to welcome both teams and to welcome the spectators. And I sincerely welcome you here. You've worked hard and you've accomplished a lot. And here you are in the first round of the national competition. The one thing I'd like to say to everybody, the coaches, the attorneys, the witnesses, the folks who support them, is you should be proud of your accomplishment to be here today. I can assure you that your parents and your coaches and maybe even your little brothers and sisters are proud of you as well. We're pleased to be here and we're looking forward to watching you. The first thing I want to do here is let our scoring judges introduce themselves. Brandon, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, I'm Brandon Tate. I practice out in Indianapolis, Indiana at Walter and Tate, and we do personal injury and constitutional cases.
All right, Mr. Standridge.
Thank you, Judge. My name is Mark Standridge. I'm an attorney practicing in Las Cruces, New Mexico, and my practice is defending personal injury and constitutional cases.
Best friend.
Yeah.
Mark Frazier, go ahead.
Yes, my name is Mark Frazier. I'm a trial attorney for 35 years, retired. I was a mock trial judge for 11 years with a school in Akron, Ohio. I was, excuse me, a coach, and I judged at the state level. And one of our teams was in the 2011 National Championship in Phoenix. So this is very exciting. I can understand how the students are very excited.
And maybe a little nervous too, don't you think? Let's get the team captains back on. And I guess we'll ask our scoring judges to click off. Turn your videos off, scoring judges. Okay. All right, so part of my script says that we are here on the matter of State of Indiana versus Smith Dawson. If you weren't aware of that, then I'll retract the earlier comments I made about you. This is being recorded, and I'm sure all of you know that you can't release the recording until after the competition is finished. That's on Sunday. Everyone knows that the coaches, the instructors, the observers are not to talk. That's the old outside the bar and inside the bar rule. So there's no communication except among the team members, etc. I want to say a word about technical problems. Technical problems happen. I don't know if you were here earlier, but I had presided over of our state competitions, and we had all sorts of technical problems. The most important one I want to mention is the audio issue. It's very important to me that the scoring judges can hear everything that's going on. So if there are audio issues in particular, I want to be made aware of it. And I have invited the scoring judges to break in and inform me if they can't hear. And I invite the team members and I invite the coaches as well to let me know if there's a technical problem with audio. That goes for everything else, and we'll solve all that, but I'm particularly concerned about being able to hear everyone. All right. Remind everyone you can't use the chat function. That's except for the timekeepers. Individuals that are not with the competing teams are not supposed to be on this. So you have seen the scoring judges I want to check and make sure that all participants are entitled to be here. So I want all the participants to turn on their cameras. I don't see 24 pictures. All right, that's enough. I can see you want to move on. I can see that. I know you want to move on. I can tell that by looking at you. All right, everybody click off. It's at the team captains and check the list of participants on the sidebar and make sure everyone is someone you know. That's pretty awkward. I need to smooth that out. You know you're not supposed to identify yourself. That means I hope no one's wearing a school jersey or something like that. And you don't say, oh, it's so-and-so, we do this. I won't do that either. All right, so much for that. I'm going to ask the teams to introduce your members. We'll start with the prosecution. We'll introduce attorneys and witnesses, and I like to have the timekeepers turn their cameras on and introduce them as well. We need them. So let's start with the prosecution. Go ahead.
Good morning, Your Honor, members of the jury. My name is Lucy Bolter, and today I represent the state in today's case. Today, I will be joined by my co-counsel.
Good morning, Your Honor, members of the jury. My name is Riley Roden, and I represent the state in today's case.
Good morning, Your Honor, members of the jury. My name is Cheney Curls, and I represent the state in today's case.
And our witnesses today will be.
Good morning, Your Honor, members of the jury. My name is Lauren Nonnenmacher, and today I am Dr. N.J. Neer.
Good morning, Your Honor, members of the jury. My name is Ever Volheim, and today I am Jordan Bennett.
Good morning, Your Honor, members of the jury. My name is Malachi Zyron, and today I am Noah Hitter.
And today our timekeeper will be.
Good morning, Your Honor, members of the jury. My name is Abby Galley, and today I am the timekeeper.
Good morning, Your Honor, members of the jury. My name is Lauren Nonnenmacher, and I will also be keeping the time.
And with that, Your Honor, the state is ready to proceed to preliminary matters.
All right, defense.
Good morning, Your Honor, members of the jury. My name is Lucy Dembski on behalf of the defense. I'll be conducting the direct examination of Captain Smith Dawson, the cross-examination of Mr. Noah Hitter, and I'll be delivering the opening statements as well.
Good morning, Your Honor. On behalf of the defense, my name is Aiden Connors. I'll be conducting the direct examination of Mr. O.B. Good, the cross-examination of Mr. Jordan Bennett, and delivering the closing arguments in today's case.
Good morning, Your Honor, members of the jury. On behalf of the defense, my name is Maya Newman-Toker, and I will be conducting the direct examination of Ms. Portina Storm and the cross-examination of Dr. N.J. Neer.
And our witnesses.
Good morning, Your Honor. My name is Lindsay Reamer, and today I'll be playing Portina Storm.
Good morning, Your Honor. I'm Jocelyn Pickard, and I'll be playing Captain Smith Dawson.
Good morning, Your Honor. I'm Gabriel Sachs, and I'll be playing O.B. Good.
And our timekeeper.
Good morning, Your Honor. My name is Sasha Lifshay, and I will be the timekeeper on behalf of the defense.
Okay, great.
Your Honor, this is Judge Frazier. Could the defense attorneys repeat their name? I'm sorry, the first, who's doing the first attorney of the first witness direct? The director.
I'll be directing the direct examination of Captain Smith Dawson and the cross-examination of Mr. Noah Hitter.
And your name is, again?
Lucy Dembski.
Lucy?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay. And then who's directing Portina Storm?
Good morning, Your Honor. My name is Maya Newman-Toker, and I will be conducting the direct examination of Portina Storm.
Okay. And then who's directing O.B. Good?
Yes, Your Honor. My name is Aiden Connors, and I will be conducting the direct examination of Mr. O.B. Good.
Okay. Thank you so much.
With that, Your Honor, the defense is ready to proceed with preliminary matters.
Okay, is that all you need, Mark?
Yes.
Okay. We all know there's some lag in the audio part of this. I'm going to try not to talk over you. I know you'll do the same, but we're going to have to be a little patient sometimes with that. All right, well, here's a more familiar question. Are there any pretrial matters we should discuss? Prosecution?
Yes, Your Honor. Due to the online format of today's trial, may we stipulate that the defendant has already been properly identified?
You may.
Once again, due to the online format of today's trial, may we use share screen to properly identify and enter an exhibit into evidence?
Yes.
May we assume that all objections are heard at sidebar?
I think that's one of the rules, yes.
Pursuant to Rule 4.4, may we also assume that all witnesses have been pre-sworn?
I will swear the witnesses.
Yes, Your Honor. Due to the online format of today's trial, is it permissible for us to remain seated during directs and crosses? We mean no disrespect to the court.
I understand that, and either team, attorneys or witnesses may sit or stand however you need to, or at your discretion, it'll be fine.
Yes, Your Honor. And lastly, we just ask that you take judicial notice of the stipulations found on pages 5 and 6 of the electronic copy of the case, specifically stipulation 26.
I have specifically taken judicial notice of stipulations 1 through 26, and I have them in front of me.
Yes, Your Honor. And with that, the state is ready to proceed.
Defense?
Yes, Your Honor. We'd just like to establish that today, no witnesses are sequestered, so they're present the entire time in trial.
That's correct. There is no sequestration. That does not change any rules pertaining to extrapolations regarding witness statements.
Yes, Your Honor. We'd also like to ask your preference because of this online situation. Would you like us to ask, would you like us to assume that when we're screen sharing exhibits for identification, that it's constructively outside the presence of the jury, or should we go ahead and ask every time?
Oh, no, you don't need to ask every time. Until they're admitted and until you ask to publish them, they're not visible to the jury.
Thank you, Your Honor. With that, the defense is ready to proceed.
Timekeepers, I do have a word for you before we get started. You're aware of the 15-second rule. What I like is for the timekeepers, as well as can be accomplished in this virtual format, to keep in touch with each other. So look at chat. Hopefully there won't be more than a 15-second discrepancy. If there is, you know, you're supposed to bring it to my attention. My normal way to dispose of those issues is to go with the person that has the most time remaining, if that's any sort of a guidance for you. Also, please let me know when time has expired. I try to watch the cards, but I'm also paying attention to other things. And I'll mention one more thing to everyone. We're all working with the online scoring and the score sheets, and it's going to slow us down a little bit. And in particular, I have to, even though we have 3 scoring judges, I'll also be completing a score sheet just as a backup, and that's going to slow me down. And I'd like for someone to remind me, if I forget, anyone, that I want to take a 2 or 3 minute break after the prosecution presents its case and let the scoring judges and myself catch up with that. That's a lot. But without your help, I'm sure to forget something of it. All right, let's have the witnesses raise their right hands, please. Turn on your camera so I can see the witnesses. Is that all of them? I thought there's more. All right, raise your right hand, please. Do you promise the testimony you're about to give will faithfully and truthfully conform to the facts and rules of the mock trial competition? If so, say I do. All right, good. Thank you. You can turn your camera off. I always make an effort to address the attorneys by their names. I'm not familiar with the way your names are laid out here on the roster, but I'll do my best. Ms. Roden, would you like to begin?
Yes, Your Honor. May it please the court, counsel, members of the jury. Time is money. On May the 4th of 2019, this defendant, Smith Dawson, was more concerned about money than taking the time necessary to be safe. This defendant was the captain of a large shipping vessel on our very own Ohio River. Because she was in such a hurry, she crashed into another boater on the water, and someone died as a result of it. This defendant was concerned about a financial penalty, but it was the victim who paid the ultimate price. That, members of the jury, is why we are in this courtroom here today. My name is Riley Roden, and together with my co-counsel, we represent the state in today's case. More importantly, we represent the memory of the victim, Jamie Hunter, known to loved ones as Catfish, the star pitcher of the Evansville baseball team, a beloved member of the community, and a man who deserves justice for the way his life came to a tragic end by the actions of this defendant. On the evening of May 4th, 2019, Catfish had just finished filming a commercial for his local baseball team and decided to celebrate by going jug fishing, his favorite pastime. But this night was different. He wasn't able to pull any fish from the river. Instead, it was the Evansville Police Department that had to pull Catfish's body from the river. You see, this defendant was driving one of her company's large shipping barges that night when she recklessly caused this victim's tragic death. And on top of that, you will learn that this defendant intentionally fled the scene of the crime because she had to make it to her destination fast. Because to this defendant, time was money. And that is why she is being charged with 2 crimes here today: reckless homicide and leaving the scene. As the state, we carry what is called the burden of proof. That simply means it is our job to prove to you beyond a reasonable doubt that Smith Dawson committed these crimes. We will meet that burden to you today by all of the evidence that you will see and hear. The state will bring you 3 witnesses. First, you'll hear from Dr. Demeanor, the United States Coast Guard lead investigator for the crash. She will tell you how she issued a slow, no-wake warning for the area of the Ohio River on which this defendant traveled. This warning required all boats to travel at a slower than normal speed. But you'll learn this defendant immediately called her, demanding that she either remove the warning or give her a waiver. She was angry. She told her that there was an important shipment that night and she didn't have a second to spare. Going slow, being safe, wasn't an option, because you'll learn that being late would mean a steep financial penalty for her company. Next, you will hear from Jordan Bennett, an investor who was on the defendant's ship that night. You will hear Mr. Bennett testify about a contract he had entered with this defendant. A lot of money was at stake. That same day, Mr. Bennett informed this defendant that if they were late one more time, they would face a 6-figure penalty. This defendant became anxious, agitated. Mr. Bennett will tell you that that night on the ship, alarms rang out, signaling that the ship was off its course. He felt the crash on the right side of the ship, and he confronted this defendant about the collision. But this defendant would not stop. She just kept going. Time was money. Finally, you'll hear from Noah Hitter, a young man who was actually on the boat with the victim when this defendant crashed into it. Pay close attention as he describes how the defendant's boat barreled towards them, the wake knocking him and Catfish off balance. You'll learn that as the two struggled to regain control, they were hit from behind, the impact destroying their boat, ultimately drowning Catfish. You see, there was a price to be paid if this defendant was late. And so she let the victim pay it with his life. Ladies and gentlemen, after listening to the witnesses and after you've seen and heard all of the evidence, we will ask you to come back with the only just verdict, finding this defendant guilty. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Ms. Dembski,
Yes, Your Honor. May I proceed?
please.
May it please the court, counsel, Members of the jury. Miss Roden just told you a story about how Jamie Hunter died. She told you a story about a tragic boat crash. But what the state didn't tell you is that not a single witness saw this crash occur. What they didn't tell you is that there was another boat on the river that night, a speedboat, and that speedboat could have been responsible for Mr. Hunter's death. And what they can't prove is how this accident even happened. Members of the jury, the state has based their entire case on guesses. And guesses just aren't good enough. So let's go back to May 4th, 2019. That day, Captain Dawson was called in as a replacement captain at around 3:30 in the afternoon. Now, the river was a little higher than usual, and there were some logs and debris out, but it was nothing that the captain hadn't seen before. She's been a captain for over 40 years. It's her entire life. Now, everything was going smoothly that day until that speedboat that I mentioned earlier began going in circles around the defendant's towboat. It was going faster than any other boat on the river that night. And as it was doing so, it was creating a giant wake. But abruptly, that speedboat sped away. And right after it did so is when something hit Mr. Hunter's boat, killing him. Members of the jury, what happened to Mr. Hunter is tragic. But today, we're going to show you that there's no plausible way Captain Dawson was at fault, because all that the state has is guesses. Now, the state has charged Captain Dawson with reckless homicide and leaving the scene. As the state, they have the burden of proof in today's case, which means they need to prove each element beyond a reasonable doubt. We're confident the state won't be able to meet their burden today. To show you why, we'll call 3 witnesses to the stand. First, we'll call Portina Storm, an expert in boating safety. She'll tell you that there are many plausible explanations for what could have happened that night, and that the state's story isn't even the most likely one. You'll also hear that this was a tragic accident and that there's no one to blame for it. Next, we'll call the defendant, Smith Dawson herself, to the stand. She'll tell you that she's been a captain for over 40 years and that she would never do anything to put anyone on the river at risk. She'll tell you that that night, she hit a log, not a boat. Finally, you'll hear from O.B. Good, the mechanic. He'll tell you that he was on the boat with the defendant that night, and that from his years of experience on the river, he thought that Captain Dawson acted safely. So members of the jury, throughout today's trial, I want you to consider 3 important things. 1, did Captain Dawson believe she was doing the right thing? 2, is the state's story the only plausible story? And 3, did anyone actually see this accident occur? Because members of the jury, at the end of today's trial, you're going to be left with guesses. And guesses just aren't good enough. They certainly don't prove guilt. Which is why at the end of today's trial, my co-counsel Aidan Connors is going to come before you and ask that you find Captain Dawson not guilty on all counts. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Let's pause for a moment here. All right. Before we call the first witness, and because we have to be flexible with this format, I had the sense during the openings that it would have been better for the attorneys if I had asked the scoring judges to turn their camera on. So there would be more than just one person for you to look at. And you can judge responses that way. I think unless there's an objection from Ms. Bolter or from Aiden Connors regarding closing, then I'll ask the scoring judges to turn their cameras on for closing. Is that okay, or is that objectionable?
Yes, Your Honor, there's no objection from the state.
No objection from the defense, Your Honor. We're happy with that.
Okay, good. So I just ask the scoring judges to remember that for me, and we'll have your cameras on when we call for closing. All right, Ms. Bolter, call your first witness, please.
Yes, Your Honor, the state calls Dr. N.J. Neer to the stand. Before I begin, Dr. Neer, I just want to make sure that you can hear me okay.
Yes, I can.
Your Honor, permission to proceed?
Yes, please.
Dr. Neer, please introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Dr. N.J. Neer.
Dr. Neer, are you currently employed?
Yes, I'm the director of the United States Coast Guard Investigative Service, their River Watch Division. I'm also the police chief, safety officer, and budget manager for the entire Midwestern District.
And what type of training and experience did you have before becoming the director of the River Watch Coast Guard Service?
Well, to start, I have 3 degrees, a bachelor's in mechanical engineering, a master's in industrial management engineering, and of course a doctorate in safety engineering. After I graduated from the academy, I also received a 5-year commission into the Coast Guard as a lieutenant junior grade. I left active duty in 2000 and became a civilian Coast Guard investigator and reservist.
In what area do you specialize in as an expert?
My expertise is in nautical safety, which includes water and vessel safety. I also have experience in boating and criminal investigations involving the water.
Dr. Neer, I want to talk to you about the reason we're in court today. What happened on May the 4th, 2019?
That night, I received a call to respond to and investigate a fatality that occurred along the Ohio River.
Were you able to determine who the victim of that fatality was?
Yes, through the course of my investigation, I received and reviewed a coroner's report for Jamie Hunter.
Would you recognize that coroner's report if I showed it to you today?
Yes, I would.
Your Honor, permission to share screen for purposes of this witness, identifying an exhibit that's been pre-marked as Exhibit 14.
You may.
Dr. Neer, do you recognize this?
Yes, I do.
And what is it?
This is a copy of the coroner's report I reviewed for Jamie Hunter.
And is it a fair and accurate copy of the coroner's report that you yourself reviewed?
Yes, it is.
Your Honor, at this time, the state offers into evidence Exhibit 14 as States 14.
Defense, I understand that under stipulation 25 objections have been waived to this exhibit. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And I assume you have no objection, right?
No objection, Your Honor.
All right, Exhibit 14 will be admitted with no objection under stipulation. Consists of 3 pages. Go ahead.
Dr. Neer, I want to talk to you about your investigation. What was the first thing you did when you arrived on scene?
I first located the crash site where I observed what appeared to be the remnants of a vessel strike or a collision in the water. I was able to determine that a crash had occurred between a small fishing boat and a large commercial vessel along the Evansville Oxbow.
And who was the driver of the boat involved in that crash?
I later learned that the driver was the defendant, Smith Dawson.
Do you know this defendant?
Yes, I do.
How do you know her?
Well, her shipping business, Nob Hill Barge Company, has been operating on the Ohio River for longer than I've been working at the Coast Guard. But I specifically remember her calling me earlier that day on May 4th about a no-wake order that I had just implemented.
Well, why did you issue that no-wake order?
I had received several notifications that morning that the river was approaching high or dangerous flood levels. So I implemented the no-wake order to slow the speed of water traffic. The high water levels can cause vessels to lose control. They can drift more easily, which is a big concern, especially for the larger river barges. So I went ahead and issued the orders to slow them down.
What was the defendant's response to that order?
Well, they had asked me for a waiver. They said that they had an important shipment that day and couldn't have any more delays. But when I told her that it would be unsafe for me to provide her with one, she said, "Near, I don't need a waiver, but it would really help." But that was pretty much the end of it.
Dr. Neer, I want to take a step back and talk to you specifically about where this crash took place. If I showed you a map today, would you be able to show us where this crash occurred?
Yes, I would.
Your Honor, permission to share screen for purposes of this witness identifying an exhibit that's been pre-marked as Exhibit 2.
You may.
Dr. Neer, do you recognize this?
Yes, I do.
And what is it?
This is a map of the Ohio River from about Newburgh to Mount Vernon.
And how do you recognize this map?
I've worked on this river for over 20 years now.
And is it a fair and accurate depiction of the Ohio River that you've worked on for decades?
Yes, it is.
Your Honor, at this time, the state offers into evidence Exhibit 2 as states 2.
Ms. Newberger?
No objection, Your Honor.
All right, Exhibit 2 is admitted with no objection, consists of 1 page.
Yes, Your Honor, permission to publish to the jury.
You may.
Dr. Neer, could you walk us through where this crash took place?
Sure. So the crash occurred here at point 7, which I've marked in red. It's along the Evansville Oxbow, which is one of the most dangerous turns on the Ohio River.
And where was this crash in relation to your no-wake restriction?
The no-wake zone began at point 3 here in yellow and continued all the way down to point 4.
Thank you, Dr. Neer. Now I want to talk to you more about your investigation. Based on the investigation at the crime scene, what did you do next?
After completing my investigation at the crime scene, I then drove to the Mount Vernon Police Department, where their officers had escorted the captain, Miss Smith Dawson, and 2 other eyewitnesses that were on her boat.
Did you speak with anyone at the Mount Vernon Police Department?
Yes, I interviewed the defendant first and then spoke with her mechanic, Mr. Obie Good. The other eyewitness, Mr. Jordan Bennett, refused to speak with me.
Were the defendant's versions of events consistent with the other eyewitness regarding what had happened that night?
No, actually, the defendant gave several statements that contradicted the other 2 eyewitnesses on several key issues, which was significant to me as an investigator.
Dr. Neer, what additional steps did you take in your investigation?
After completing the interviews, I also pulled the electronic charting logs from the defendant's boat and reviewed the AIS transponder. Now, both of these track the path the defendant took that night. Think like a black box on an airplane or a GPS tracker. They both confirm that the defendant's boat was at the scene of the crime and that they were significantly off their charted course.
Objection. Characterization of the path as significantly off its charted course.
All right, response to that?
Yes, Your Honor. As an expert in the field of safety vessels in the water, Dr. Neer would certainly have the information to testify whether or not a vessel would be off its course, as she's worked on the Ohio River for 20 years and is an expert in safety on the water.
May I respond, Your Honor?
Yes.
This witness can certainly testify that it was off of its course, but as she has no exact coordinates as to where it was or where its path was, she cannot say it was significantly off its course. That's misleading to the jury.
Anything else, Ms. Bolter?
Yes, Your Honor. As she reviewed logs and AIS systems, she found specific markers as to where this crash or where this defendant was at specific times. Therefore, she would have a specific marker as to where this defendant was. Therefore, she could determine if it was significantly off course or where she was at the time.
All right, objection is overruled. Continue.
Dr. Neer, I can ask you that question again. What additional steps did you take in your investigation?
Like I mentioned, I reviewed the electronic charting logs from the defendant's ship and the AIS transponder. They did show that the defendant was off their charted course and that they were at the scene of the crime when it occurred. I also did a full examination of the defendant's boat.
You just mentioned doing an examination of the defendant's boat. What did that examination reveal?
I found olive green paint matching the decedent's boat that had rubbed off on the starboard bow of the defendant's ship, which is the same side that the eyewitnesses had both heard and felt a crash. Now, with a boat of this size, we normally don't see major physical damage unless they were to collide with another ship or vessel of the same size, which is why the paint scrape does make sense, being from a smaller vessel.
Would you recognize a picture of the defendant's boat that she was driving that night if I showed it to you today?
Yes, I would.
Your Honor, permission to show a screen for purposes of this witness identifying an exhibit that's been pre-marked as Exhibit 3.
You may.
Dr. Neer, do you recognize this?
Yes, I do.
And what is it?
This is the Susan K. Roberts, which is the same boat that the defendant was driving at the night of the crash.
And how do you recognize this boat?
I did an examination of the boat.
Is it a fair and accurate depiction of the defendant's boat that she was driving that you yourself examined?
Yes, it is.
Your Honor, at this time, the state offers into evidence Exhibit 3 as States 3.
Ms. Newman-Toker?
No objection. However, we would like to note that this is an image of the boat from before the crash, and so it doesn't represent anything like a paint scrape.
Do you have any objection to noting that to the jury, Ms. Bolter?
No, Your Honor.
All right, well then the jury is so notified. Exhibit 3 is admitted with no objection, consisting of 1 page.
Yes, Your Honor. Now, Dr. Neer, were you able to confirm the identity of the boat with eyewitnesses from the scene?
Yes, I was.
Was there anything additional that you uncovered during your investigation?
Through my further investigation, I became aware of a contract between one of the eyewitnesses, Mr. Jordan Bennett, and the defendant. It signaled to me a potential reason as to why the defendant was deviating from their normal driving patterns that night, as well as why they had called me earlier that morning.
Based on your investigation and all eyewitness accounts, were you able to form an opinion as to what occurred that night in the Evansville-Oxbow area?
Yes, I was.
And what was your conclusion?
In my expert opinion, I found that the totality of the evidence indicated that the death of Jamie Hunter was caused by either a direct hit from the defendant's boat or significant weight caused by the defendant's boat. Now, my opinion is that the defendant deviated from safe boating practices, that they were driving at an unsafe rate of speed considering the water conditions that night, and that they did veer off their charted course. It's also my opinion that the defendant did not stop or slow down once the crash had occurred.
In what county did these 2 crimes occur in?
Vanderburgh County.
Nothing further at this time.
Cross-examination, Ms. Newman-Toker.
Yes, Your Honor. Now, Dr. Neer, there were logs on the water, right?
There were.
Logs can easily become projectiles if pushed by a wake, right?
Yes, if there is a larger vessel causing weight, that is true.
Right. And now those projectiles can puncture or overturn a smaller boat, such as the fishing boat in today's case.
It's possible if another boat has created wake.
Right, which is why there are multiple possibilities for what could have happened, right?
Well, my investigation did lead me to this defendant.
Dr. Neer, that wasn't my question. My question was, there are multiple things that could have actually caused this small boat to overturn, right?
Sure, either the defendant could have hit the boat, or they could have caused the wake that capsized them, or, as you mentioned, caused a log to be a projectile and hit them.
Well, let's talk about why you might say that. There's some evidence in this case that you simply don't have, right?
We had all the evidence that we needed.
You weren't able to recover the small fishing boat, right?
That's correct. Based on the eyewitness testimony, the boat was completely destroyed.
You weren't able to speak with Jordan Bennett, an eyewitness?
They refused to speak with me, that's correct.
You weren't able to definitively match the paint on the Susan Roberts, the towboat, to the small fishing boat?
Unfortunately, the paint is fairly common with boats, but there was a visible match to the decedent's boat.
Well, you weren't able to compare it to the decedent's boat because you didn't have the decedent's boat, right?
Objection relevance, Your Honor, may I be heard?
You may.
Your Honor, this witness is not an expert in anything with paint. Therefore, any questioning about matching the paint of the decedent's boat to the defendant's boat is extremely not relevant today, as she is not an expert in anything relating to paint.
Response, please.
Certainly. This witness has based part of her opinion on the paint being on the towboat, and I'm simply questioning her about whether or not that paint definitively matched it. She can say that she doesn't have knowledge of it, but that goes to show that her investigation was not as complete as she may claim it to be.
Relevance objection is overruled.
Yes,
Continue.
Now, Dr. Neer, there's one more thing you don't know. You don't know about the speedboat that was in the area, right?
I am aware that there was a speedboat in the area.
You were never able to find that speedboat, were you?
Unfortunately not. The eyewitnesses weren't able to make a positive identification as to the boat itself or the driver of the boat, so we weren't able to track it down, unfortunately.
And in fact, since none of the witnesses talked about the speedboat in their interviews, when you made your opinion, you didn't know that speedboat was even in the area, did you?
That's correct.
So your opinion that this was the fault of the towboat took into account the towboat and the fishing boat, not the speedboat, right?
That's correct.
So now I want to talk about your history with evidence. In 2015, you lost critical evidence on a case you were working.
Objection, improper character.
Explain your objection, please, Ms. Bolter.
Yes, Your Honor. The fact that I believe opposing counsel is trying to get into the fact that Dr. Neer lost critical evidence a few years back. This only tends to prove that because she lost critical evidence, she may lose critical evidence in the future and is extremely irrelevant and tends to only inflame the jury. And it's only going to show that because she did something in the past, she would do it again in her future investigations.
May I respond?
Your response, Ms. Newman. Yes, we're over lagging each other. I apologize for interrupting you. Go ahead.
Well, I believe Ms. Bolter is referring to propensity, which is Rule 404A1, but pursuant to Rule 404B2, evidence of wrongs are allowed for purposes other than propensity, such as the competence of a witness. And since this is an expert witness, that is the purpose of this. I am showing that she has been incompetent in her investigations before. This is not a character trait. This is not propensity. This is simply saying this witness may not be as reliable as she seems.
Ms. Bolter, do you have a comment then about the distinction Ms. Newman Toker is drawing?
Your Honor, I would stand by my same objection that this doesn't tend to prove that she's incompetent, but rather it tends to prove that because she lost critical evidence in the past, she would somehow lose critical evidence in the future regarding a speedboat, a log, and would only tend to show propensity.
The objection is overruled. Continue.
Yes, Your Honor.
Now, in 2015, you lost critical evidence in a case you were doing, right?
Unfortunately, we did misplace some evidence for a case. Yes.
This caused substantial public controversy, right?
There was some public controversy, sure.
And after that time, on the advice of a mentor, you stepped away from investigations, right?
No, I did not step away from investigations. I did fewer of them, but it's because I am now the director of the entire office that I do fewer of them, but I'm still fully qualified.
You do fewer investigations because after 2015, you realized investigations weren't the thing you wanted to focus all your time on.
I do fewer investigations because I am the director of the Louisville office, meaning that I oversee the entire Coast Guard River Watch Division in that office. So I have more responsibilities than just the law enforcement aspect. I also have administrative responsibilities, inspection team responsibilities, and more.
Okay, Dr. Neer. Well, in this case in particular, you conducted a series of interviews, right?
Yes, I did.
It's best practice to write up those interviews the next day, right?
Generally, yes.
You didn't do that, did you?
No, unfortunately, my partner and I, Special Agent Melissa May, were busy with other aspects of the investigation, following up on leads such stuff. So we didn't get a chance to do that right away.
Right. It took you almost a week to write up those interviews, right?
Less than a week, yes.
Well, I want to talk about some of the things you learned in those interviews. You learned that the decedent, Jamie Hunter, was on a fishing boat after dark, right?
I did.
That's not recommended, right?
Correct. It's not recommended, but it is up to boater discretion.
It's not recommended to be out after dark, and it's not recommended to be out without the proper lighting, right?
That's correct.
It's not recommended to be out after dark without the proper lighting and without an AIS system.
Correct. It is not recommended, but it is up to boater discretion.
And you found out that Jamie Hunter wasn't wearing a life jacket when he died, right?
I was aware of that, yes.
His cause of death was drowning, right?
Drowning and blunt force trauma, which I attributed to the crash.
Right, Dr. Neer. Now, there's one thing you say that on all boats is incredibly important. You say adding alcohol to the river is a recipe for disaster, right?
Objection, hearsay.
Response?
This is the witness's own statement.
Your Honor, may I be heard?
Yes.
Although it's the witness's own statement, it is still an out-of-court statement being offered for the truth of the matter asserted, as she has not testified to that in court, so it would still be hearsay.
It's creative, Ms. Bolter, overruled. Continue.
Dr. Neer, you believe it's a recipe for disaster to add alcohol?
I do.
You think for small pleasure craft, it's not a question of if, but when an accident will take place?
Not just for small pleasure craft, but yes.
And on the night of the incident, Jamie Hunter had been drinking on the river.
That was my understanding, but his blood alcohol level was below the legal limit.
According to the coroner, alcohol was a contributing factor to his death, right?
Yes, it was likely a contributing factor, but as I said, the blood alcohol level was below the legal limit.
Thank you. No further questions at this time, Your Honor.
Redirect?
No, Your Honor, I just asked that this witness be excused.
All right, witness may be excused. Thank you for your testimony.
The state calls Jordan Bennett to the stand.
Let's wait just a moment. We have to complete some of these things.
Yes, Your Honor.
I'll let you know, each of you, when we're ready to call the next witness. All right, I'm sorry for these delays, but they've asked us to do these things contemporaneously with the event. All right, Ms. Curls, call your witness, please.
Yes, Your Honor. The state calls Jordan Bennett to the stand. Before I begin, Mr. Bennett, can you hear me okay?
I can, yes.
Please introduce yourself to the members of the jury.
Hello, my name is Jordan Bennett.
And where are you from, Mr. Bennett?
Queens, New York, New York.
And what is your occupation?
Well, currently I'm the owner of a business called White Star Funds, which is a hedge fund. Basically, we find businesses, we give them money, and we make money off them. It's a risky business, but that's the fun part.
I'd like to talk to you for a moment about the Nob Hill Barge Company. Are you familiar with that company?
Yes, I invested in them around April of 2019.
How did you first become involved with this company?
Well, you see, it's actually kind of a funny story. So I had taken out my small private plane that, I own, and I stopped in Evansville. While I was there, I saw what looked like a major money-making operation to me. On the Ohio River, there was just these enormous barges carrying tons of freight. And to be honest, all I saw was a water interstate just paved in gold. And I was kind of like a cartoon character, and my eyes just turned to money signs. And all over this money trails, there was just one logo on it. KHBC. So I reached out to the owner, Smith Dawson, and I made him an offer that she could not refuse.
Can you tell us about the offer that you made with Nob Hill Barge Company?
Well, Dawson and I went back and forth for a while, but we did come up with a final term sheet.
Would you recognize a copy of that term sheet that both you and this defendant signed if I showed it to you today in court?
I would, yes.
Your Honor, permission to share screen Exhibit 13 for purposes of this witness identifying it.
You may.
Do you recognize this?
I do.
What is it?
It's the final term sheet.
And how do you recognize it?
I paid a lot of high-priced lawyers a lot of money to draw up this term sheet.
Is it in the same or substantially the same condition as when you last saw it?
It is.
And in addition to you, who else signed this contract, Mr. Bennett?
Smith Dawson also signed this contract.
Did you witness the defendant signing this?
Oh yeah, I was there with her when she signed it.
Is this document kept regularly in the normal course of your business?
It is.
Your Honor, at this time, the state offers into evidence Exhibit 13 as states 13.
No objection, Your Honor.
All right, Exhibit 13 will be admitted with no objection. It consists of 2 pages. Go ahead.
What was the purpose of this contract?
Well, we executed this agreement and both of us signed and dated it because I was pumping $100 million into their company. So I had to get them on board. Get it on board? Tough crowd, I guess. With my business mentality that my mom always taught me that time is money.
What changes did Smith Dawson agree to on behalf of the company with this contract?
Well, she had several changes that she was willing to make to receive my $100 million. She was going to reduce crew. She was going to make employees pay for their own health care because I ain't paying for that. And 3, she was going to get a lot faster because there are these financial penalties that are built into all their contracts. And I don't do financial penalties. So that part was stopping effective immediately.
After you both signed this contract, when was the next time that you saw this defendant?
Well, I believe it was May 3rd, which was one day before this incident occurred. As a successful businessman that I am, I've learned that people don't always behave the same way in front of you as they do behind your back. So like I had done with many of my other business ventures and investments, I had made a surprise visit to them on that day.
What happened when you surprised the defendant with that visit?
Dawson took me to some hole-in-the-wall restaurant, the Petroleum Club or bar, or something like that. And then I got a chance to look at the books, and let me tell you, they definitely were not pretty.
What do you mean by that?
Time is money, like my mama always taught me. The books showed that to one supplier, they had already been late 9 times in less than 3 months, and they didn't even know it, which was just absurd to me. If they were late one more time, they were incurring a financial penalty of 150,000 big ones. I don't know if that's a lot to Dawson with the way she does business, but that's a deep hole in my pocket, and I wasn't about to let this company waste my money.
And after hearing this news, what did the defendant do?
She offered to take me to lunch. Anything to talk about something else, I guess. And she brought along another boat mechanic, Obie Good.
Did you see or hear the defendant receive any calls or texts while at that lunch?
Yes, actually, at around 3:30, Dawson got a text message after we had had 3 or so more rounds of drinks. And man, did she look agitated. She just started muttering.
Characterization, may I be heard?
Yes, please.
We haven't heard any foundation as to why Mr. Bennett is characterizing Captain Dawson as agitated. We haven't heard any specific actions, any observations that he made.
Ms. Carls?
Yes, Your Honor. If I may proffer, I believe that this witness is about to go into why he believes that this witness did look that certain way. But again, Your Honor, I'm not asking this witness to go into the mind of anyone else, but to solely testify as to his own personal observations on what he saw.
Brief response, Your Honor.
Yes, ma'am.
As Mr. Bennett is not an expert witness, we just ask that that basis comes before the opinion. And also, I believe that testimony regarding someone's agitation does go to their mental state, although it may be permitted if it's within the witness's rationally based perception. And we've already heard the foundation of concrete things they observed.
All right, Ms. Connors, I'm going to allow the witness to testify to things he personally observed. I will see if sufficient foundation is laid for any observations he may make as characterizing mental state, et cetera. And you may renew your objection if it's appropriate later. At this point, your objection is overruled. Continue, Ms. Curls.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Mr. Bennett, what happened after the defendant received that text?
Well, she told me that she had to make a call and she walked out. About 15 minutes later or so, she came back in and she told me she was going to have to captain for a barge delivery that night, and we had to leave right away. And on the way there, I just kept reminding her that time is money.
So did you get on the towboat with the defendant for this trip?
Yes, both Obie Good and I did, and that's the mechanic I was talking about earlier.
Can you describe the defendant's demeanor as you boarded the boat?
Well, from what I observed, she was just sweating profusely, which I thought was just nasty. And she seemed uptight and annoyed, and I just stopped talking because I didn't want her to hit anything.
Can you describe the river where y'all got on the towboat at?
Yes, the water level was really high, and there were a lot of debris in the river. There was a lot of big logs and fun boats or speed boats, and I just got a little nervous because it seemed like there's a lot going on. And usually, I have nerves of steel, but we were pushing barges that I swear were 3 football fields in length, and there's no way a ship that big would be able to navigate through all that chaos.
Objection, misleading. May I be heard?
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Bennett does not know things about how this river normally looks. He doesn't know about what conditions they typically navigate. So for him to say that it would be difficult to take that large boat down the river under the conditions when it hasn't been established that he knows what conditions are normally like, only serves to prejudice Captain Dawson to the jury and mislead them into thinking that they may have been more treacherous than they actually were.
Ms. Curls?
Your Honor, I believe that's not an objection that is allowed in this jurisdiction, but even so, this witness was only testifying as to what they saw. They have been to the river before, as they testified about earlier, and they would certainly be able to make a comparison between then and now. And while they do have limited knowledge about boats, it would be based on the rationally based perception that they would think it would be a difficult job to undertake.
I'd just like to clarify, Your Honor, that misleading falls under Rule 403, which you may find on page 2 of the National Rules of Evidence.
Thank you, Ms. Connors. I'm going to sustain your objection, although I'm not sure I understood the full dimensions of it, and ask that the Ms. Curls go ahead and continue with your direct.
Yes, Your Honor.
Just move to strike that portion of the witness's testimony.
Well, Ms. Connors, I'm going to leave that in the record because I found through experience that sometimes the Court of Appeals does not agree with me. We'll leave it for review. Go ahead.
Yes, Your Honor.
Mr. Bennett, when you were on board the defendant's ship, did you see them at all times behind the steering wheel?
Well, you see, I know enough about boats to know that a steering wheel is in the wheelhouse, and I saw Dawson just randomly leave it on numerous occasions that night. It just seemed odd to me, like no one would leave the wheel of their car, and I figured a boat was the same.
What happened next?
Well, we were coming around the tightest bend that we had been through in the river, and that's when I felt like Dawson finally open throttled it and punched it into high gear. And to be honest, I felt pretty cool. I felt like I was on a Fast and Furious speedway or something. And then alarms in the boat started going off, and we started drifting and sliding into the curve. And I think he even made a joke about how I could high five the people on the shore because we were that close.
When you mentioned that you're so close to shore, Mr. Bennett, what do you mean by that?
Well, I've always thought that commercial boats had their own lane, I guess a commercial lane. And the red buoys just seemed to create this massive lane in the middle of the river. But what I saw was when Dawson took the ship way outside of them, that's when the navigator started beeping like crazy.
So what happened while you were outside of those red lanes?
Well, we felt this huge thump on the right or starboard side, and it definitely felt like we hit something. I asked Dawson if we should stop, but she said no.
Did this defendant, Smith Dawson, make any comment to you about hitting something?
Yes, she just reminded me of how big the boat we were on was, and she said, and I quote, "It's more like a New York cab hitting a stop sign. The sign is going to feel it more." And we just kept going.
Mr. Bennett, did you hear anyone else mention a potential crash to this defendant?
Oh, yes, I did. Obie Good, the mechanic, came up and he started telling Dawson about how many beer cans were trailing behind the boat's wake and that we should stop and check it out.
Hearsay.
Response, Ms. Curls?
Yes, Your Honor. This statement was a statement made to the defendant.
we're using it for the purpose of showing knowledge and not for the truth of the matter that there were beer cans, but that the effect that this statement should have had on the defendant, that should have been for them to stop. And because we're not using it for the truth value, Your Honor, it would not be hearsay.
May I respond?
Yes.
This is a statement made by O.B. Good out of court. And I believe they are offering it for the truth of the matter to say that there were beer cans trailing behind the boat, which is not something which is admissible under the hearsay rule.
Your Honor, may I be heard?
Please.
Your Honor, whether there were beer cans or not, it doesn't matter. The truth is that this statement should have gone, the effect of this statement should have told the defendant that it would have been best practices to stop. However, Your Honor, should you believe that we are using it for the truth value, under Rule 803, subsection 1A, this would fall under the hearsay exception, present sense impression. This witness heard another individual on the defendant's boat describing an event made immediately after they perceived it.
Brief response, Your Honor.
Respond to the present sense impression hearsay exception, please.
Yes, Your Honor, just that this was not an immediate statement made by Mr. Good. I have a good faith belief that it was a few minutes after this impact, and that I believe this is a matter that should be brought up on Mr. Good's cross-examination. It's not something for Mr. Bennett to testify about.
Anything else, Ms. Curls?
Your Honor, I just stand by my previous response that this statement was made immediately after the other person on the boat perceived it.
All right, I'm going to sustain the objection.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Go ahead, Ms. Curls.
Mr. Bennett, what other involvement did you have?
Well, we had to stop for gas, but right as we did, we were greeted by the police and we were separated and taken into questioning.
Thank you. Nothing further.
Cross-examination, Ms. Connors.
Yes, Your Honor. Good morning.
Good morning.
I want to talk about some things that you just said on direct examination. Would that be all right?
That would be fine with me.
Shipping is a dying industry, right?
Oh, I don't know if it'd be dying, but I would describe it as troubled.
Right. It's a troubled sector, and that's why you were interested.
Yes, that is the nature of a hedge fund. We go into sectors that are troubled to make money.
That's why when you saw it, your eyes lit up like money signs.
Yes.
And KHBC is, in your opinion, run a little messily.
It is, yes.
And it's fair to say you're worried about the success of that company.
I was, yes.
And if they do badly, you can break up their family business and sell the parts.
That was the nature of the contract that I made. If they were not making money, I would dissolve the company and liquidate all of its assets.
Right, you've already got a plan in place.
I do, yes. As a successful businessman, it's always good to have a backup plan.
Your plan is to sell those boats and barges to a Brazilian man you already got lined up to buy them.
Yes, that is my plan.
Your plan is to hand their docks and contracts over to another company?
Yes.
Your plan is to do all of that if Captain Dawson is convicted.
Well, regardless if she's convicted or not, she violated the terms of the contract. So I get the company and I'm going to break it up either way.
Just to be clear, Mr. Bennett, that is a final terms sheet, not a legally binding contract.
It is, but we both signed it.
And is it your testimony that it was not your plan to sell those boats and barges if Captain Dawson is convicted?
It is my plan. I don't believe I ever said it was not.
All right, Mr. Bennett. Now, I want to move on, and I want to talk about some things you left out of your direct examination. You're a New York City guy, right?
I am.
You like your life to move pretty fast.
I do, yes.
May 4th, that was your first time on a working boat.
Oh, not a working boat. I had been on yachts before.
Right. And when you were on the river, you saw a speedboat that was moving pretty fast, right?
I did, yes.
That speedboat was moving so much faster than your barge that you wished you were on that.
Yes, that is true. The barge we were on was kind of boring.
Moving so slowly.
Yes, it was.
You seemed pretty sure on direct examination that Captain Dawson should have stopped, so I'd like to talk about some things you aren't so sure about. The last time you were on a boat, like you said, was in Nantucket, a yacht.
It was, yes.
When you were on that yacht, did you ever hit any logs?
I don't recall hitting any, but I mean, it's completely possible.
You never felt an impact from a log?
I know, but again, it's completely possible that I just didn't feel it.
When you were up on that 70-foot yacht in Nantucket, did you ever hit another boat?
We did not.
You don't know what either of those things feels like.
I do not.
And on May 4th, it was pretty dark out.
It was, yes.
When you were up in the wheelhouse in the dark, you felt something hit you.
I did feel something hit us, yes.
Didn't hear anything. You didn't hear anyone call out after that.
I did not hear anyone yell for help, no.
You'd never felt something like that before.
I had not, no.
And you didn't actually see what hit you?
I did not know. I was reassured by Captain Dawson that it was just a log or something.
And you can only guess as to what caused that impact.
Yes.
Thank you. No further questions at this time, Your Honor.
Correct, Ms. Curls.
No, Your Honor.
All right, witness may step down. Thank you for your testimony. All right, we'll pause for just a moment here. Let us catch up. Everyone check your microphones. They should all be off at this point. Ms. Roden, call your witness, please.
Yes, Your Honor. The state calls Noah Hitter to the stand. Before I begin, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Please introduce yourself to the members of the jury.
Hello, my name is Noah Hitter.
And where do you work?
I'm currently the marketing manager for the Evansville River Rats. It's our local co-ed baseball team.
Where do you live, Mr. Hitter?
I live here in Evansville, and I've lived here ever since I got the position with the team. It's a great community, and I'm proud to call it my home.
I'd like to turn your attention to the day of May 4th of 2019. What were you doing that afternoon?
I had just finished shooting a promotional video for the River Rats, and that's when one of the players, Jamie Hunter, and we decided that we would go fishing along the shore of the Ohio River.
Describe Jamie Hunter to us.
Well, his real name was Jamie Hunter, but we all called him Catfish. We called him that because he was just so unbelievably good at catching these massive catfish. I truly loved hanging out with him.
Can you tell us about jug fishing?
Yes, jug fishing is a simple, fun, and easy way to go fishing along the river. Instead of using a fishing pole, you use empty milk jugs. You place fishing hooks in them and you place them in the water. And then you can use fishing line to tie them together so they don't float away. The fishing jugs had reflective tape on them so they could be seen too.
And once you got to the marina with Catfish, what did his boat look like?
To be honest, it was really just a rowboat that had a small motor and some lights on it. It was nothing fancy or not even a fancy boat, and it didn't cost a lot of money, but Catfish, he truly loved it.
And what river did you and Catfish take the boat out on May 4th of 2019?
It was the Ohio River.
And about what time did you guys actually get out on the water that evening?
I know it was before sunset, probably around 6:30, 6:45, somewhere in there.
Now, Mr. Hitter, I'd like to be really upfront with this jury. Did either of you have anything to drink that night?
Yeah, I think I had a drink at lunch and one on the boat. And Catfish, he's a bit of a heavier drinker than I am, so I know he had a couple more than I did.
Were you ever worried, based on anything that you saw, that Catfish may have been too intoxicated to have operated the boat properly?
Not at all. He started the boat, he jug fished, he maneuvered the boat, and he spoke to me without any kind of indication that he had too much alcohol.
Tell us about what the river was like that night.
Well, the water level was very high, and it was a clear day. It was one of the clearest days that we had in a very long time. I also noticed there was lots of logs and debris in the river that night, and a high number of pleasure boaters.
Mr. Hitter, did you see any designated areas in the water that you observed for Catfish's boat to stay away from?
Yes, I noticed these red lights on buoys that showed the big boats where they're supposed to stay. It also showed us small boats were supposed to stay as well. We just kind of stayed near the edge the whole time.
Let's talk about the logs and debris in the river. Did you ever have any problem with those?
Well, they were definitely a nuisance. The logs would hit my boat and it would startle me, and they would get in our fishing lines and ruin our fishing. But they never made me lose balance or anything.
At some point in time, did you see any large towboats on the river?
Yes, I saw many large towboats, specifically barges, and they all stayed in their commercial lane and they all went slow except for one.
Mr. Hitter, describe the one towboat that you did not see stay in its commercial lane.
There was this one towboat that was moving much faster than all the other towboats that we had seen previously. And it was huge, but there was something weird about it. It wasn't staying in the commercial lane. It was in the same lane as we were. And I wanted to make sure that we weren't in their lane, but I checked and we were where we were supposed to be, but that's not where they were supposed to be.
Mr. Hitter, Catfish's boat that you were in, did it have lights on it?
Yes, of course. And the fishing jugs that we put out, they had lights on them too and reflective tape.
Did you take notice of where Catfish's boat was in relation to the buoys at this time?
Yes, I wanted to make sure that we were not in their way. So I kept checking the buoys just to make sure. But we were where we were supposed to be, and they were on the same side as us. The buoys are kind of like lanes of a highway. It tells you where the cars are supposed to stay.
Objection. Lacks foundation. May I be heard?
Yes, please.
We've heard no foundation laid that Mr. Hitter is able to testify to the lanes in the river and where boats are supposed to be. He's not a boating expert. He's not a captain, and therefore we don't know if he can testify to those lanes yet.
Ms. Roden?
Your Honor, I believe this witness did testify about his observation of the buoys that marked the different lanes for the boats to stay in.
May I respond?
Yes, please.
Mr. Hitter testified that he noticed that there were buoys, but because we don't know if he's qualified enough to tell us what those lanes actually were, he can't testify to it yet.
Objection sustained.
Thank you.
Ms. Roden?
Mr. Hitter, how did you know that the buoys marked where you were supposed to be in?
Catfish told me about them.
Objection. Hearsay.
Response to that?
Your Honor, this is going for the effect on the listener, Mr. Hitter, that because of Catfish's statement, he now knows what the buoys' purposes are.
May I respond?
Yes, Ms. Dempsey.
Your Honor, I believe Ms. Rhodes is using that statement exactly for the truth of the matter, that because Catfish told Mr. Hitter what those lanes meant, that's exactly what those lanes meant.
I'll sustain the objection. Go ahead.
Thank you.
Mr. Hitter, I'd like to draw your attention back to the towboat. When you saw it coming at you, what happened next?
I started to get really nervous and I started screaming at Catfish just to get us out of the way. I wanted to make sure that we gave them ample room so that they wouldn't run over us. And as I looked up, I saw this large towboat just continue to come towards me. Luckily, the barges actually missed us, barely. But then I looked up as I saw this towboat right in front of my face, and that's when everything was destroyed around me.
Is there anything that you remember right as you hit the water?
Yes, I remember hearing people shouting, and I saw someone up in the wheelhouse, but that towboat just kept on going.
Mr. Hitter, what side of the large towboat did you see coming towards the boat that you were in?
It was the right side. That's the side that we got hit on.
And what was the last thing you saw before you hit the water?
I remember seeing this mountain logo on that towboat.
Would you recognize a picture of the mountain logo if you were to see it today?
Yes, I would.
Your Honor, permission to share screen with an exhibit that's already been entered as States 3?
Yes, you may.
Mr. Hitter, Do you recognize this boat?
Yes, it looks just like the boat that hit us that night.
Do you recognize this logo of the boat?
Yes, that's the logo that keeps me up every night. That's the logo I saw as I hit the water, and that's the logo that took away my friend.
Thank you. I have nothing further.
Cross.
Yes, cross-examination.
Good morning, Mr. Hitter.
Good morning.
Now, I want to start by talking about something you just said on direct examination. You told us that Mr. Hunter didn't have enough alcohol in his body that made you nervous that night. That's what you told us, right?
I noticed he had a few drinks, but it wasn't unusual for Mr. Hunter to have a few drinks.
Right. You told us that you felt perfectly safe with Mr. Hunter on that boat with you, right?
I didn't really feel comfortable on the water. The water's not really my home, but I felt comfortable enough to stay, even though I did ask if I could go back.
Right. Actually, Mr. Hitter, if it were up to you, you wouldn't have even stayed on the river that night. You would have gone right back.
That's correct. The river's not my home, but Catfish, he's always on the river.
That night, your boat wasn't even supposed to be out past dark, was it?
No, it wasn't.
Right. So, Mr. Hitter, you started that night off by breaking the rules.
To be honest, I didn't really know how long jug fishing was going to take. I knew that when I went on the water, it was before sunset.
So to answer my question, when you were on the river, you were breaking the rules.
Yes, but I didn't know that I would be breaking the rules.
But you knew that you weren't supposed to be out past dark.
Yes.
All right. Now, Mr. Hitter, you would go so far to say that your boat isn't even a real boat. That's how small it is, right?
It's not. Catfish didn't really have a lot of money to buy a fancy boat. There was really just enough room for us to sit, fish, and talk, but he really did love it.
Right. It had no AIS system.
No, it didn't.
It only had the necessary lights, nothing more.
Yes.
That night, the river was incredibly high, wasn't it?
It was.
There were logs and debris everywhere.
There was.
Mr. Hitter, those conditions, they aren't safe for your small boat, are they?
They're not.
Now, those logs, they actually posed a problem for your boat because once one hit your boat and it scared the daylight out of you.
Yes, it made this extremely loud noise, and also the logs would really interrupt our fishing.
Right, and that log that hit you, it wasn't even propelled by anything. It was just the current.
Yes.
Now, I want to move on and I want to talk about that speedboat. That boat was going faster than any other boat on the river, wasn't it?
Yes, it definitely made me nervous. I was worried it was going to crash into us, but luckily I saw it went back to the middle of the river and then it went downriver.
Right, it was creating a giant wake, wasn't it?
Yes.
You actually thought that that speedboat was going to hit you, didn't you?
I did. I'm glad it didn't. Maybe if it did, I might not be here today.
But as that speedboat abruptly sped away, it created a giant wake, didn't it?
Yes, I was worried about the boat, but luckily we made it through.
Right, as that speedboat sped away and it created a giant wake, it shook your small fishing boat like crazy, didn't it?
It did, and then I looked up, and that's where I saw this large towboat right in front of me.
Mr. Hitter, I just want to talk about the speedboat right now. Right after it started shaking your boat like crazy, you thought that you were going to capsize.
Yes, I was worried.
And right after that is when something hit your boat.
Yes, right after that is when that giant towboat came.
Now, Mr. Hitter, you told us on direct examination that you saw that mountain logo, didn't you?
Yes, I did.
So you were looking up at the towboat.
That is correct.
You weren't looking down at what was in the river at that time. You were looking up.
Yes.
There were logs everywhere.
There were.
There were other boats everywhere.
Yes.
You don't actually know what hit you, do you?
All I know is that the last thing I saw was that giant mountain logo. And then I didn't know I wouldn't see my friend.
Mr. Hitter, to answer my question, You don't know what hit you.
No,
You just guessed.
I just saw this towboat and that's all that I saw.
You just guessed.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Hitter. No further questions at this time, Your Honor.
Redirect, Ms. Roden.
No, Your Honor.
All right, witness may be excused. Thank you for your testimony.
Your Honor, at this time, the state rests.
Was just about to ask you that. We're going to pause for a couple of minutes here and let our scoring judges catch up, and me too. So let's just take a couple of minutes. All right. Let's move on to defense. Ms. Newman-Toker, call your witness, please.
Absolutely. At this time, we would call Ms. Portina Storm to the stand. May I proceed, Your Honor?
You may.
Good day, Ms. Storm.
Good day. Good day, Your Honor.
Could you please state your name and occupation for the court?
Of course. My name is Portina Storm, and I'm the founder, president, and a consultant at Pacific Trident Global Incorporated.
What is that company?
Well, we're an international consulting firm, and we deal with matters having to do with ocean, canal, and river shipping.
How long have you been in that position?
Since I founded the company in 2007.
And was that your first time in the maritime industry?
No, so I actually grew up in Napoli, Italia, which is a big shipbuilding hotspot, and my father was in the Italian Navy, so I followed in his footsteps, was in the Accademia Navale, and was then in the Italian Navy for about 10 years.
What did you do next?
Well, after that, I moved to the States and took some graduate classes at Texas A&M University until I qualified to get my United States Coast Guard Master's 100-ton license.
And what's required to qualify for that particular license?
Well, you need a lot of experience and knowledge when it comes to boating in general, as well as many, many hours on the water captaining ships.
And does anyone else in court here today hold that same license?
Yes. In fact, Captain Smith Dawson also holds that license.
So now I want to transition to talking about today's case. What did you review before coming to court today?
Well, I reviewed, of course, the witness statements of the eyewitnesses, the other expert witness, as well as the defendant. I also reviewed all of the exhibits and reports having to do with conditions on that night and other various pieces of information. And I also went to the scene on the river where the incident took place and did an inspection and investigation of that area of the river and the MV Susan K. Roberts, which was the towboat involved.
I'm showing you a picture that has been pre-entered as Exhibit 3. Do you recognize this document?
Yes, I do.
Could you tell us a bit about the Susan K. Roberts?
Of course. So the MV Susan K. Roberts is a towboat designed to push barges, as you can see it is in the photo, and it's owned by the Nob Hill Barge Company, which is Captain Smith Dawson's company.
Now, I'm showing you what's been marked as Exhibit 12. Do you recognize this document?
I do.
Is this a fair and accurate depiction of the small fishing boat that day?
It is.
At this time, we move this exhibit into evidence and have it published to the jury.
Any objection to Exhibit 12?
None, Your Honor.
All right, Exhibit 12 will be admitted with no objection. It's just one page.
On this enlarged copy, can you tell us a bit more about the small fishing boat?
Of course. So the small fishing boat, the Sun Dolphin, was owned by Mr. Jamie, or as he was known as by his friends, Catfish Hunter. And it was a very small fishing boat designed to hold about 2 people.
So on the evening of May 4th, where was this boat?
Well, Mr. Hunter had taken his boat out to go jug fishing with his friend. But they had gone to the Oxbow Turn in Evansville, Indiana on the Ohio River, and they had stayed out past dark, which was past the time they were supposed to come in.
And at the same time, where was the large towboat?
Well, the large towboat was also on the Ohio River. Captain Dawson was piloting the ship and making a shipment for her company.
And how was she navigating her ship?
Well, for the first portion of the trip, since conditions were rather manageable, she used autopilot to help her navigate.
Was she still using autopilot when she neared the Oxbow?
No. So actually, as I normally recommend to my clients, she had turned autopilot off so that she could have a better handle on the big ship when she was going around this very tight turn.
And where was the fishing boat around the time of the incident?
Well, we know that the fishing boat was in or around the commercial channel.
And do we know if the fishing boat was struck by the barges being pushed by the towboat?
From witness testimony, we know that the barges being pushed by the towboat did not come in contact with the small fishing boat at the time of the incident.
And how about the towboat itself? Do we know if that impacted the fishing boat?
Well, unfortunately, the eyewitness doesn't have a clear recollection of what exactly caused the small fishing boat to overturn, but there are many possibilities of what could have happened that night.
So I want to talk about those possibilities. Ms. Storm, what sorts of things could cause a boat the size of the Sun Dolphin, that small fishing boat, to overturn?
Well, the Sun Dolphin is pretty small, so there are a lot of different possibilities. Now, we can organize these into 2 categories. One is currents or wakes created by other boats, and the second is a physical object hitting into the small fishing boat.
Well, let's start with that first category you mentioned, wakes. What sorts of wakes or currents could overturn a small boat?
So when we're talking about wakes that would be large enough to overturn a boat like the Sun Dolphin, that could come from a large boat in the area or a boat going at a fast speed in the area. And when it comes to currents, high water levels and high wind can easily create very large currents.
So you mentioned a second class of things. You said objects. What sorts of objects could overturn a boat?
Well, there are a few different things that could have overturned the boat. So the first is another boat in the area, which we heard there were a few that night. It could have been the towboat, or it could have more likely been the speedboat that was going around that night. And secondly, it could be debris or logs in the water. Now, a log would be strong enough to turn over the boat, either by being pushed by a current, by another boat's wake, or from being pushed off of another larger boat.
Now, Ms. Storm, you just mentioned a lot of possibilities. Were any of these elements, wakes, currents, logs, present on May 4th?
Yes, in fact, they were all present on May 4th.
So what happened after the small fishing boat capsized?
Well, Noah Hitter briefly lost consciousness, but luckily he survived. Unfortunately, Mr. Hunter, who was not wearing a life jacket, did not survive the incident.
Did you come to an expert opinion in today's case about Captain Dawson's conduct on the river?
I did.
What's the basis for that expert opinion?
Well, the basis of my opinion is, of course, all of the exhibits and reports I reviewed, as well as all of the witness statements and my own inspection and investigation of the area and the towboat. And of course, on top of that, all of my experience and training as a captain of a ship, and also my 10 years in the Italian Navy.
To a reasonable degree of professional and maritime certainty, what is your expert opinion in today's case?
Well, my opinion is twofold. Firstly, that Captain Smith Dawson acted completely within the standards of care and conduct for a captain on the night of May 4th. And secondly, that while this was a tragic incident, Captain Dawson is not responsible.
Thank you. No further questions at this time, Your Honor.
Cross-examination, Ms. Roden.
Yes, Your Honor. Ms. Storm, I'd like to break down a couple of things you did throughout the course of your investigation. Let's start with the autopilot. This autopilot mechanism you testified about actually locks the course in memory, correct?
Yes, it does.
This is kind of similar to cruise control in a vehicle.
It's similar, but far more advanced than cruise control.
So just to be clear, autopilot keeps the boater's chosen course.
Yes, it does.
But it's not designed to correct itself if there are obstacles in that course path?
Not necessarily, but it depends what kind of obstacle you're talking about. Most autopilots are evolved enough to be able to go through medium to light conditions.
But if something goes wrong, the captain needs to take over.
Yes, of course.
In fact, there are times when autopilot should not be used at all.
There are. Autopilot has its limits, just as captains do.
These conditions look like heavy traffic.
Yes, extremely heavy traffic on the river is a good time to steer a boat manually.
So when other boats are in the water?
Yes, when there is a large volume of other boats.
It should also not be used during sharp turns?
Yes.
You'd agree with me that one sharp turn in the Ohio River is the Evansville Oxbow area?
Yes, it is. And that's precisely why Captain Dawson turned autopilot off to go around the Oxbow.
It's dangerous, this Oxbow, correct?
Yes, it's probably one of the most dangerous portions of the Ohio River.
And you know that it was actually in this area that the crash occurred?
Yes. Well, I would like to make a distinction. We don't actually know if a crash occurred, but it was in this area that the small fishing boat overturned.
Let's talk more about the conditions of the river that this defendant was traveling on. You're aware that there was a no-wake restriction in effect on May 4th?
There was.
Because the water levels were high.
Well, I believe that the rationalization of the no-wake zone was basically that conditions overall were not very manageable, but personally, I would disagree with that.
To be safe, this defendant was supposed to move at the slowest speed possible.
Yes, the slowest speed possible to maintain control, which is precisely what Captain Dawson did that night.
But the truth is, your investigation found that the defendant's boat was actually going so fast that it created wake in the water that night.
That is true. So when it comes to no wake zones, there's a misinterpretation that means that is people interpret it that there should be no wake at all, which is simply not true. When you have a large boat, especially like a towboat pushing barges, currents can make it very difficult to maintain control, especially when going downstream, which the towboat was that night. So it's important to sometimes go fast enough to create a wake in order to maintain safe control of the vehicle.
But just to be clear, in regards to the no wake restriction, this defendant's boat still made a wake that night because of the speed that they were going.
It made a small wake, which is perfectly acceptable while a no wake zone is in place.
This river was filled in with logs and debris, correct?
There was a certain amount of logs and debris in the river.
And you'd agree that autopilot should not be used in those circumstances.
I would disagree with that.
You would disagree that autopilot should not be used in circumstances with logs and debris in the river?
Yes, logs and debris are fairly common in the river. Sometimes there's more than others, but ultimately it's up to the captain whether or not to use autopilot. And if conditions are somewhat manageable, it's perfectly fine.
But the truth is, autopilot can make a significant enough mistake that the boat could actually leave the commercial channel that it's supposed to be in.
That is true, but that's only under certain conditions if the autopilot is set in the wrong mode or in a very uncomfortable situation, or if it's not up to date.
So that's a yes to my question. It can make a significant enough mistake that the boat could leave the commercial channel.
Yes, it's possible.
Let's move to another part of your investigation. You looked at the photographs of the defendant's ship as a part of your investigation?
I did.
You observed olive green paint on the side of the defendant's ship.
Well, not in the photograph, but when I went to the ship itself, I did.
And you were here in court today when Dr. Neer testified about the color of the victim's boat?
I was.
And you heard that the victim's boat was olive green in color too.
I did hear that.
There's one other part of your investigation that I'd like to talk about. You agree with me that this defendant should have stopped that night if she believed she had hit something?
Well, it's really up to a captain whether or not they stop after an impact. But since Captain Dawson did not believe that she had hit a person holding watercraft, she had no obligation to stop.
But the truth is, even if she thought it was a log she had struck, she should have stopped.
I would disagree. I think it's up to a captain. All captains are different. If I were in her situation, I may have stopped, but that doesn't mean that she did anything wrong.
That's right. You would have stopped under similar circumstances.
Yes, all captains are different.
In fact, you know other people on the defendant's boat told her to stop that night.
Objection, hearsay.
Response?
Your Honor, this is going for the effect that it should have had on the listener, that if other people on the boat that night were aware that a collision had occurred, this defendant should have stopped.
Ms. Newman-Toker?
I believe what Ms. Roden is saying is actually the truth of the matter asserted, that precisely if Captain Dawson believed the hearsay of the other people on the boat that she had hit something, she should have stopped. And that's hearsay within hearsay, and neither of those fit any exceptions.
Ms. Roden, I'm going to ask you to ask your question again so we make sure that we've clearly defined the objection.
You know other people on the defendant's boat told her to stop that night.
I'm going to overrule the objection. Continue.
Yes, Your Honor.
I'll re-ask that question. You know other people on the defendant's boat told her to stop that night.
I'm aware that Obi Good and Jordan Bennett suggested that they stop to see what had happened, but ultimately it's the captain's decision whether to stop or keep going.
Right. This defendant chose not to stop.
Yes, Captain Dawson didn't believe anything had gone wrong.
The truth is, it would have been best practice for the defendant to stop.
Well, it's always best practice to stop if there had been if there had been some kind of strike to the boat, but it doesn't always happen.
Thank you. I have nothing further.
Redirect?
No redirect, Your Honor.
All right. This witness may step down.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Dembski, call your witness, please.
At this time, the defense calls Captain Smith Dawson to the stand. May I proceed?
Yes, you may.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, and good afternoon, Your Honor.
Can you please state your name and age for the court?
I'm Captain Smith Dawson, and I'm 60 years old.
What do you do for a living, Miss Dawson?
I'm a boat captain, and I also own and run my family's shipping business, which is an uphill barge company.
How did this family business get started?
It was started by my grandparents, Jack and Rose Dawson, in 1936 after they emigrated from Ireland to America. And it was then passed on to my dad, and he expanded it some, and then he passed it on to me.
So as a captain, what kind of training or expertise did you have to go through?
I grew up on the river, on the boats with my dad, and he taught me a lot of what I know today. But as well as learning from him, I was also training for my Coast Guard master's license. And that's a license to captain a 100-ton vessel. And for that, I needed almost a year's worth of experience on boats and to take and pass a variety of tests. And I passed with flying colors, and I've recertified all those requirements every few years for the last 40 years.
Do you like your job?
I do. I like that. For me, business is about family. I get to have my employees over for Sunday dinners, and I get to make sure that they're taken care of. And I get to invest in my local community. So, for example, I'm a sponsor of our baseball team.
I want to fast forward to 2018. What was going on with your company then?
That was the year that I met Jordan Bennett. And now Mr. Bennett is an investor, and we decided to go into business together. So he came up for a visit 3rd and 4th of May of 2019, and we drew up a preliminary term sheet.
Now I want to talk about May 4th of 2019, the night in question. What were you doing then?
Well, that day began normal. I woke up and I drove down to Jordan's hotel and I picked him up. And from there, I took us over to our office and I set Jordan up with our files and paperwork and such. And I left him to go over those and went to work myself.
What happened when Mr. Bennett finished looking over those books?
He finished a wee bit earlier than I was expecting, but around 3 p.m. or so, he poked his head into the room that I was in and he asked me if I wanted to go to the club.
Did you?
I obliged him and I grabbed Obi Good, who's our relief captain and mechanic, to come along with us.
What happened when you got to the club?
We had some lunch and some drinks. Now, Jordan, he had quite a number of drinks, but I myself, I just had the one before switching to water because I was the replacement captain that weekend and I knew there was a chance I might have to go out onto the river.
Did you have to go out onto the river?
I did. I got the call shortly after we arrived for lunch that one of our scheduled captains had called in sick, so I told Jordan and Obi that and I got ready to leave.
What happened as you were getting ready to leave?
Well, I got a notification from the Coast Guard instituting a slow no wake policy for a portion of the river. And now, I'd seen the river that day myself, and I did not think it was particularly high.
Objection, improper opinion.
Explain that objection, please, Ms. Bolter.
Yes, Your Honor. This defendant is not an expert in anything related to water. Therefore, her opinion as to whether the water was high that night or whether the slow no wake order should have been issued at all is completely out of her opinion, as she's not an expert in that field.
Your response, Ms. Dembski?
Yes, Your Honor. Captain Dawson has been on the river for her entire life. She's been a captain for over 40 years. She's an experienced captain. In this jurisdiction, experts don't need to be tendered to make expert testimony as long as the proper foundation has been laid. And we have laid the foundation that Captain Dawson is an experienced captain. Therefore, she can testify to the height of the water level.
The objection is overruled. Continue.
Yes, Your Honor.
Well, I'd certainly seen the water higher than that before. So I called engineer, who's with the Coast Guard, to talk to her about it.
What happened on that call?
I told NJ what I thought, and I suggested perhaps they could have posted some warnings instead, and she agreed that that was an option.
So when you hung up the phone with Dr. Newell, what was your understanding of the slow no wake policy?
Actually, I was not 100% certain. I'd expected that they would be changing it, and I did not see any slow no wake signs on the river that night. But as I say, I was not 100% sure, and I did not get notification of a change either.
So now, before I move on and talk about that boat ride, I want to talk about you as a captain. In general, how do you captain a boat?
Well, all our boats are fitted with up-to-date technology, and we check and replace that every few years. So we use navigational technology, that's our autopilot software, and we have our automatic identification systems. And additionally, we're equipped with radios, and I keep one on my lapel at all times so I can communicate with the other captains on the river. And also, the average speed of our towboats is only about 6 miles per hour, so it's typically a pretty slow, gentle ride.
So how did that boat ride go that night?
It was fine. It was getting dark as we left, and the water was a wee bit high, and there were some logs and debris, and a number of pleasure boaters out as well. And one of them, a speedboat, was zipping all around us for a while, but I've seen all that before many times, and I know how to handle it.
How do you handle it?
Something that my father taught me is you use your autopilot as a tool and not as a crutch. And that's what I did that night.
Objection, character evidence.
Response, Ms. Dembski.
Yes, Your Honor. I don't believe that this is improper character evidence. We're not bolstering Captain Dawson's testimony today. Excuse me, we are bolstering Captain Dawson's testimony today, but only because it's already been attacked.
Ms. Bolter, do you have another comment? Would you like to explain your objection further?
Yes, Your Honor. The defense is explaining that because Ms. Dawson typically places her autopilot off when she's going around the Oxville, she would do it again that night the crash occurred. Therefore, they're using it to show propensity that because Ms. Dawson did it one time, she would do it again, and that is the definition of character evidence.
May I respond?
You may.
Your Honor, this goes directly towards the witness's credibility. I asked Captain Dawson what she was doing that night on the river and how she was navigating these circumstances. She told us that that night she turned the autopilot off because she uses it as a crutch. She uses it as a tool, not a crutch. It goes directly towards her credibility.
I'm going to overrule the objection, Ms. Bolter.
Yes, Your Honor.
So I had my autopilot on.
Excuse me, but I'm sorry to interrupt you. Ms. Dembski, would you ask your question again so I can keep up with the testimony?
I'm sorry, Your Honor.
Captain, how were you handling those situations that night? Those circumstances, excuse me.
What my father taught me is to use your autopilot as a tool and not as a crutch. So that's exactly what I do. I had it on part of the time, but at the same time, I was also looking out onto the river, looking for logs, for debris, watching out for other boats, and navigating.
What else happened on the river that night?
Well, as I was approaching the Evansville Oxbow, which is a turn on the river, I got an alert from my autopilot, and it was telling me that it had had an issue with its course. So at that point, I disabled it, and I took the helm myself, and I corrected that issue. And then I took us through the turn, and I accelerated as I did so in order to get the force I needed to turn my boat and to get out of our drift path.
What happened next?
As I was going through the turn, the speedboat that I had mentioned before came zipping around us, and it kicked up some wake. And at that point, I heard a thump, but I figured that the speedboat had just pushed a log into us.
Did you stop?
No, I did not. As I said, I figured it was just a log. I've been hit by logs before. I know what they sound like. I know what they feel like. And you don't stop for a log.
When was the next time you stopped?
We docked at Mount Vernon to fuel. And that's when I was approached by the Coast Guard. And they told me there had been an accident that night involving catfish and Noah, and that catfish had died. And I told them everything I knew about the river that night, and I tried to help as much as possible.
Captain, I want to be really clear here for the members of the jury. Did you ever hit a boat on the river that night?
No. I did not. What happened to Catfish was a tragedy, and I am truly sorry for him and for his family, but I know what a log feels like, and that's all that I hit, nothing more.
Thank you. No further questions at this time, Your Honor.
Cross-examination, Ms. Bolter.
Yes, Your Honor. Before I begin, Ms. Dawson, I just want to make sure that you can hear me okay.
Yes.
Now, you were in a rush on May the 4th.
No, I don't believe I was.
Is it your testimony that you were not in a hurry that day to get to your boat?
Oh, to get to the boat, I like to keep a tight schedule.
So that's a yes to my question that you were in a rush that day.
Aye, to get to the boat.
And that's because you had entered into a sales contract with somebody named Jordan Bennett?
I, in general, like to be on time.
Well, that sales contract stated that if you were late on 10 of your shipments, you would lose everything.
No, I believe you're referring to my contract with the Ohio River Consortium, and that's an incentive-based contract which states that if we're late a number of times, we pay a penalty, and if we're early a number of times, we get a bonus, but that's not really anything to do with Jordan.
Well, in your contract with Jordan Bennett, it actually stated that if you suffered a big financial penalty, you would lose your CEO position.
Oh, aye, that's right.
You would lose your company.
I believe an independent board would have been created, so I would have still been a part of things.
Well, if an independent board were created, you wouldn't be a part of that board. You wouldn't lose your company.
I would be a part of it, sure, but no, I would not be on that board.
Ms. Dawson, you also wouldn't get that $100 million that Mr. Bennett had promised you.
Well, the company would still get it.
But you would not personally.
No.
On May 4th, you had already been late 9 times.
That's what Jordan told me, but I myself thought it had only been 5 or 6 times.
But that's a yes to my question that you were at least told that you had been late 9 times.
Yes.
Now let's talk about what happened that day. You received a notification from the Coast Guard that a no-wake policy had been implemented.
Why, that's right, I did.
That policy meant that you had to go slower than normal.
Aye, for a portion of the river, but the slow no wake policy was only instituted from Newburgh until roughly after Mount Vernon, and we were going all the way to Tennessee.
But that slow no wake policy meant that it would put you behind.
Aye, for that section of the river, but we could always make up any lost time later on in the journey.
You were so worried about being put behind that you actually called the Coast Guard.
I called the Coast Guard because I did not think that slow no wake order was necessary. I thought it was a wee bit extreme, and I wanted to talk to him about it.
Well, she told you that it was necessary, right?
I asked her if they could put up a few warnings instead, and she agreed with that, so I was not 100% sure what her decision would be.
You were actually in court here today when you heard Dr. Neer testify?
Aye, I was.
She told you that she didn't give you a waiver.
No, but I thought she might be changing the order.
You knew that you didn't get a waiver that night.
Why, I did not get a waiver, but I was under the impression that perhaps she would change the slow no wake order for everybody on the river that night.
But that's a yes to my question that she didn't change that order.
No, she said that she did not in court today.
After that phone call, you decided that you would be a captain of your boat that night.
The phone call that one of my scheduled captains had called in sick, I had to fill in.
It wasn't until after you were denied that waiver by the Coast Guard that you decided you would be the one to drive that boat.
No, I got the call that my scheduled captain had called in sick and I was the replacement captain, so that meant I would be filling in. And then after that, I got the call from the Coast Guard.
Miss Dawson, you were in a hurry that night to get to your boat?
I like to be on time.
You were in such a hurry that you forgot the glasses you always take with you?
Those would be my reading glasses. And now they don't impact my ability to captain a ship, but I called Obie Good so he could do my reading and my safety checks for me.
You were in such a hurry that you deviated from your own company's safety policy?
I'm not sure what you're referring to there.
You didn't complete the safety checklist like you always do.
No, I expected that the captain I would be filling in for would have done that, and I placed a reprimand in her file for not doing so.
But that's a yes to my question that you did not complete that safety checklist.
No, I did not check for that.
Now, at some point on the trip, you passed through the Evansville Oxbow area.
That's right.
You knew your boat wasn't going slow.
It was going slow.
Is it your testimony that your boat was going slow?
The average speed is only about 6 miles per hour for these boats, and I think that's pretty slow.
But Miss Dawson, isn't it correct that your boat was not going slow that night?
I think our boats were always going slow. I had to accelerate a wee bit in order to make that turn, if that's what you mean.
But Miss Dawson, do you remember giving a sworn statement in today's case?
I do.
And in that statement, you were told to tell the truth.
I was, and I did.
The whole truth.
Aye.
And nothing but the truth.
Aye, that's right.
You'd recognize that statement if I showed it to you today?
I believe so.
Your Honor, permission to share screen for purposes of showing this witness her sworn affidavit.
You may.
Miss Dawson, this is your sworn testimony.
Looks like it to me.
Is your name at the top?
Aye, it is.
I'm citing court and counsel to line 244 and 245. Miss Dawson, could you silently read that?
Aye.
So I'll ask you that question again. You were not going slow that night?
I was not going as slow as I have before, but I was not going fast either. As I say, 6 miles per hour is not that much.
Miss Dawson, you knew you were producing wake that night.
I was going the speed I needed, and that produced a wee bit of wake.
You knew you were pushing it.
I was going as fast as I needed to in order to maintain control of my vehicle.
Your boat was in the area at the time of the crash.
I was going around the oxbow.
You knew you had hit something that night.
I heard the thump, and that was a log.
That night you could have stopped, but you chose not to stop?
I heard what sounded to me like a log. I've heard that before, I've felt that before, and I don't stop for logs.
That's a yes to my question that you could have stopped, but you chose not to.
That's right.
Miss Dawson, you needed to keep your boats on schedule.
It's always good to be on schedule.
Thank you, Miss Dawson. I have nothing further.
Redirect.
No redirect, Your Honor.
All right. Witness may step down. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Ms. Connors, I see your witness is already on stand. Let's proceed.
Yes, Your Honor. The defense calls Mr. Obie Good. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, and good afternoon, Your Honor.
Could you please state your name and occupation for the court?
My name is Obie Good, and I'm a relief captain for the Nob Hill Barge Company.
What does a relief captain do?
So a relief captain is really a backup captain or a secondary captain. So when the main captain wants to take a break or leave the wheelhouse, I'm the one that takes over.
Did you work anywhere else before you were a relief captain?
I did. So before joining the barge company, I had a 25-some-year career with the Evansville Police Department Water Patrol Unit.
Did you work anywhere else?
Yes. Along with being a member of the EPD, I was also a volunteer with the Coast Guard Auxiliary.
Did you ever work on anything with the Coast Guard or with the EPD that had to do with boating safety?
Yes, so a requirement to be a member of the Water Patrol Unit is taking specialized classes in boating safety inspection, and I was also the lead investigator on a few dozen boating accidents.
Now that we know a little bit about you, I want to draw your attention to May 4th, 2019. What were you doing that afternoon?
I just finished up a late lunch when I got a call from Captain Smith Dawson. She's the owner of the family-run Nob Hill Barge Company. And she asked me if I could be a relief captain. for an
Objection,
overnight
hearsay.
shipment for her.
Response, Ms. Connors?
Yes, it's a party opponent.
Ms. Curls?
Your Honor, as this is a direct, this witness would not be a party opponent for Ms. Connors and therefore is not a party opponent.
In that case, Your Honor, we're offering it for Mr. Good's next actions. Captain Dawson asked him to go on this boat, so he went on the boat.
Darn, on the basis of what I've heard, I'm sustain the objection. Continue, Ms. Connors.
Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Good, did you ever go on the river on May 4th?
I did. I was a relief captain with Captain Smith Dawson that night.
Was that the first time that you'd worked with Captain Dawson?
It wasn't. Me and Captain Dawson, we've had a lot of experience together on the Ohio River. We know each other well. We often have Sunday dinners most week.
What's Captain Dawson like on the river?
And Captain Dawson, she's incredibly experienced. We have a running joke at the barge company that she was practically born on the river. Her dad and her grandfather, of all people, taught her how to go boating.
I want to talk for a moment about what happened when you got to the river. What did it look like?
The conditions of the river were not ideal. The water was a little high. There were some floating logs and debris as well.
And did you have responsibilities besides taking over the helm when necessary, like you mentioned a moment earlier?
I did. Another job, or part of being the relief captain, is looking over all the mechanical workings throughout the entire trip.
How did you do that on May 4th?
I performed a 45-minute safety inspection, and that's looking over everything from the engine room and around the entire vessel, and everything was in perfect working condition.
And did that safety check you did include the things outlined in the form that Miss Bolter asked Captain Dawson about just a few moments ago?
It did.
I want to talk about some other things that have happened in court today. Did you hear when Mr. Bennett said that Captain Dawson left the wheelhouse on May 4th?
I did.
Is that a problem?
No, it's not. Captain Dawson specifically left the wheelhouse and set the boat on autopilot on a relatively calm and straight part of the river. From my experience in the boating industry, captains do this on a regular basis, and there's really no rule against these kinds of practices.
And did you hear when Mr. Hitter said that conditions were dangerous for his boat that night?
I did.
Were the conditions too dangerous for the towboat to be on the water?
No, they weren't. Our towboats, they're big and they can handle these kinds of conditions. And Captain Dawson, I have a lot of faith in her abilities to pilot the Susan K. Roberts on a night like this. I wouldn't have gone on the boat in the first place if I wasn't confident in her abilities. And, there were a lot of boats that night, pleasure and commercial.
A few moments ago, you mentioned a section of the river that was straight and calm. Did you have to deal with more complex sections that night?
We did. There's this one turn, it's called the oxbow turn, and it's a U-turn or a hairpin turn. We had to go through the oxbow on the night of May 4th.
Is that the same oxbow we've been talking about today?
Yes, it is.
What was it like when you got there?
As I said, the conditions of the river and certainly the oxbow were not ideal, but there was this speedboat that was zipping around our boat. It got pretty close to us, and I thought it was quite dangerous.
What happened as you went into that oxbow turn?
We're approaching the oxbow when I heard, and we had the autopilot enabled, when I heard an alert over my headset. And this alert signifies that the autopilot is deviating from its pre-programmed course down the river and that the captain should take control of the ship. So that's exactly what Captain Dawson did, and she corrected our course.
What happened after Captain Dawson corrected the course?
So we're going through the oxbow, and the speedboat that I mentioned was zipping around, and while it was doing one of its passes around our vessel, it was kicking up this massive wake. And just then, I heard a thump beside our boat.
Did you do anything about that thump?
I did. As a relief captain, my utmost concern is for the safety of my vessel. So over the headset, or my headset, I heard Captain Dawson said she thought it was a log or a piece of
Objection
debris.
hearsay.
Ms. Connors?
Yes, Your Honor. We're not offering it for the truth of the matter asserted. We're not saying that that means definitively that Captain Dawson did hit a log. We're just offering it to show that she did in fact say it to Mr. Good. He experienced that, and that led him to not be concerned about the fact that the boat kept going.
Ms. Curls?
Yes, Your Honor. I believe that this is being used for the truth of the matter, as they're saying that it was a log and in fact not the victim's boat that the towboat ran into. Therefore, it is being used for the truth of the matter.
May I respond?
I've heard enough. Objection sustained.
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Good, did your boat stop?
It did not.
Were you concerned that your boat did not stop?
I wasn't. I wasn't really sure what we'd hit, and Captain Dawson thought it was a log or a piece of debris. I thought that was a completely plausible answer, and I trust her judgment on matters of the Ohio River.
And finally, Mr. Good, did you hear in court today when Dr. Neer said Captain Dawson deviated from safe conduct on May 4th?
I did.
Do you agree?
I don't. I spent over 25 years in law enforcement, and I know how situations like these go. We all have a tendency to want to assign blame, but frankly, Captain Dawson operated the boat safely throughout the entirety of the night.
Thank you. No further questions at this time, Your Honor.
Cross-examination, Ms. Curls.
Yes, Your Honor. Before I begin, Mr. Good, can you hear me okay?
I can.
You work for this defendant, right?
I do.
And you're testifying voluntarily on behalf of the defendant today?
I am.
On May 4th, you were on the defendant's boat?
I was.
And because you work for the company, you're aware of their safety procedures?
That's correct.
And one of those safety procedures is that before every ship takes off, you're supposed to do a safety checklist.
That's right. And I performed a 45-minute safety check that journey.
Not the safety check that you performed, but the checklist, the vessel safety checklist?
Well, the vessel safety check isn't required by the Coast Guard or anyone. It's just a practice that we have at KHBC.
But the defendant didn't do that practice on May 4th.
That's correct. Only the defendant can fill out the vessel safety check. And as she didn't have her reading glasses, she was unable to do so. So I performed a safety check myself.
Now, this trip you were on, it took place on a Saturday?
It did.
And in your experience, weekend shipments take more time, don't they?
They do.
Because there's more boaters in the water on weekends.
That's right.
And the shipment that was supposed to happen on May 4th, it had a deadline, didn't it?
That's correct. In the shipping industry, it is a time sensitive, or our shipments are time sensitive.
You knew you were short on time.
Sure.
And that's because this defendant told you that.
That's correct.
An investor was actually on the ship with you that night?
Yes.
They were breathing down the defendant's neck.
He wasn't being very helpful, and he was asking some kind of annoying questions, but I wasn't with him for most of the night.
And you noticed the defendant being uptight and anxious.
Right. She was uptight, a little anxious, and she was dialed in.
The defendant even told you, for the next week or two, we have to be perfect to keep Jordan Bennett out of the boardroom.
That's correct. I didn't really know what she was saying then, but.
I want to talk to you about how this defendant actually captained that night. You saw the defendant set the boat on autopilot?
I did. She set the boat on autopilot.
And if I understand correctly, autopilot is similar to cruise control on a car?
Well, there are some definite similarities. but autopilot is a little more advanced than cruise control, can actually steer the vessel.
And after you saw the defendant put the boat on autopilot, you saw the defendant walk off the bridge of the ship.
And that's right. She set the boat on autopilot and left the wheelhouse to help me begin my safety check.
And that wheelhouse is just the main control room of the ship, right?
Yes.
Now, based on your experience, you know it's not recommended to leave the wheelhouse without a captain.
That's right. It's not recommended to do so. But, as I said, Captain Dawson did this on a calm and straight part of the river. It was only for a few minutes to help me begin my safety check.
And even though it's not recommended, you saw the defendant do that anyways.
I did.
I want to talk to you about the point in time that the crash occurred. It was getting dark.
Sorry?
It was getting dark.
Yes.
The river level was high.
It was a little high.
There was lots of logs and debris in the water.
Sure.
At one point, you actually heard alarms going off on your ship.
Now, as we were approaching the oxbow, there was an alert that I heard over my headset. And, as I said, it just means that the autopilot is deviating from its course and the captain should take over. That's exactly what Captain Dawson did.
Right. The alarm signaled the captain of the ship must make a course correction.
That's correct. And she did make that course correction.
It was around this time that you made an observation that the ship was sailing closer to the edge of the river than normal.
That's right. And then Captain Dawson made that course correction.
And while on the deck, you also saw a speedboat.
Yes, there was the speedboat. It got pretty close to us. I didn't really know what they were thinking. I just knew it was dangerous.
You watched that speedboat get kicked up high in the wake that was coming off of your ship.
Sorry?
You watched the speedboat get kicked up high in the wake that was coming off of your ship.
I don't know if I saw that. I don't think I did, but I know that the speedboat was kicking up a massive wake itself.
Is it your testimony that the speedboat did not get kicked up in the wake that was coming off of your ship?
Oh, no. My testimony is that it kicked up a large wake as well.
And at that same time, you heard and felt this defendant rev up the engine even more.
That's right. And, when we're going around the turn, we have a drift path and to steer the ship. And we have to apply force in an opposite direction or rev the engine slightly to turn the ship around this U-turn.
And then you felt the ship vibrate.
That's right.
And then you heard this defendant say it must have been a rock, a log, or something else.
That's correct.
So at the time that you felt the collision, you heard the defendant admit that she was aware that something had been hit.
Sorry?
At the same time that you felt the collision, you heard the defendant admit that she was aware something had been hit.
The only collision I was aware of, and I think Captain Dawson as well, was the log or piece of debris that hit our ship.
Now you're a captain yourself.
I am.
You have experience with the Ohio River?
I do have a fair amount of experience.
You personally would have never attempted what the defendant did that night.
Right. Your time has expired. I'll allow the witness to answer that question and then you must stop. Go ahead.
You're absolutely right. Me personally, I have some experience, but Captain Dawson has a lot more experience than I do. I may not have taken the ship around the oxbow, but someone with Captain Dawson's level of experience, it's absolutely okay for her to do that.
Thank you, Mr. Good. I have nothing further.
All right. Thank you. May step down.
At this time, the defense rests, Your Honor.
All right. Thank you. We're going to take a couple of minutes here before we have closing and let us catch up again. All right, Ms. Bolter, are you ready to proceed?
Yes, Your Honor. Prior to proceeding, I would just ask that any additional time I have be reserved for rebuttal.
Yes, certainly. Good.
May it please the court, counsel, members of the jury. Time was money. That was the only thought crossing this defendant's mind on May 4th, 2019. The defendant was worried about losing $100 million and about losing her company. So to her, time was money, and she didn't have a second to spare. In a few moments, the judge is going to tell you that because we are the state in today's case, we carry what is called the burden of proof. This means it is our job to prove to you beyond a reasonable doubt that this defendant committed 2 charges on May 4th, reckless homicide and leaving the scene. To prove reckless homicide, we have to show that this defendant disregarded harm and deviated from acceptable standards. And because of that, Jamie Hunter is dead. The evidence has shown that this defendant entered a contract with an investor, Jordan Bennett, where he found that this defendant had been late 9 times. If her next delivery was late, her company would face a 6-figure penalty, and that wasn't acceptable. He made sure this defendant understood that. This defendant became uptight, anxious, sweating profusely as that investor reminded her to go faster. So when the Coast Guard issued a no-wake restriction, that was a problem. Their delivery for that night was going to be slowed down. How do we know that this defendant was worried? She called the Coast Guard herself and said, "I have an important delivery. Basically, I'm in a hurry. You have to give me a waiver. I'm desperate." Now, no, her words didn't actually say "I'm desperate," but her actions did. She had been a captain for over 30 years and never once called that Coast Guard. So that call, that deviation from her normal practice, is evidence of what was truly on her mind that night. Time and money. Remember, she wasn't given that waiver. So what did she do? She decided to fill in as the captain that night because she didn't trust anyone else to make that delivery on time. It would cost her too much. So she hurried to the marina in such a rush that she forgot the glasses she always takes with her. Such a rush that she deviated from her own safety policy of completing that vessel checklist. Now, neither of these things may seem like a big deal by themselves, but when you take a step back and look at how out of character it was, it becomes crystal clear. She was worried about the money her company would lose, and she was worried about being on time for this delivery. Now, we've heard this defense say Mr. Hunter may have done some things wrong that night, that maybe he's to blame for his own death, but he had been out on that water for hours before this defendant came barreling through. No log, no speedboat, no high water had caused his boat to crash before this defendant veered off course. You heard today that alarms blared, signaling that this defendant was out of her lane. Seconds later, Jamie Hunter and Noah Hitter were thrown overboard. Jamie Hunter was alive before this defendant came along and was dead when she came through. Noah Hitter also testified that the defendant's logo was the last thing he saw that night. He positively identified that this defendant's boat, the AIS log, confirmed that it was this defendant and only this defendant in that area. There was olive green paint on the right side of the defendant's boat, the same color as the victim's boat, and the same spot where Noah Hitter, Jordan Bennett, and Obie Good all heard that collision. These aren't guesses. Is that really what the defense is trying to tell you today? The second charge, leaving the scene, means she knowingly fled. Both people on the defendant's boat, Jordan Bennett and Obie Good, testified that they felt and heard the collision on the right side of the boat. They both testified that they went to this captain and begged her to stop. Mr. Good even offered to take out a rescue boat. He even admitted hearing this defendant say it must have been a rock, a log, or something else. This defendant knew she had hit something. She admitted it right then, but she knowingly refused to stop. Refused to let her own employee take out a rescue boat that might have saved Jamie Hunter's life. Because she wouldn't make the time for that. Because time was money. Every other witness, including the defense's safety expert, testified that they would have stopped. That best practice was to stop, that she should have stopped, but she refused. Because to her, time was money. And that's why we ask you for the only just verdict in today's case. The verdict that will not bring Jamie Hunter back, but will hold this defendant accountable for the choice she made. Her company over Jamie Hunter's life. Find her guilty. Thank you.
Ms. Connors,
Yes, Your Honor, permission to proceed?
please.
May it please the court, counsel, members of the jury. Time and money. Ms. Bolter is right that both of those themes are present in this case. Because Captain Dawson had all the time in the world, and all Mr. Bennett cares about is money. Even though Captain Dawson had time and Mr. Bennett testified because he wants money, Miss Bolter just told you to send Captain Dawson to prison for homicide. But the state can only guess as to what actually happened on May 4th, and their story isn't the only plausible one from that night. Miss Hitter guessed, Mr. Bennett guessed, and Dr. Neer guessed. All those guesses just aren't good enough. The state has charged Captain Dawson with two things: reckless homicide and leaving the scene. They have the burden of proof in today's case, which means they must prove each element of each of those charges beyond a reasonable doubt. That means, members of the jury, if you have questions, and you will, by the time Miss Bolter sits back down today, you may not find Captain Dawson guilty. Let's start by looking at reckless homicide. The state has to prove two things: both that Captain Dawson caused that collision, Mr. Hunter's death, and that she did so recklessly. Let's start with the first. Because Dr. Neer herself said today that logs can be propelled by a wake into a small fishing boat and break it apart. And the speedboat was making a large wake that night. Mr. Hitter told you there were logs and other boats all around the water, and members of the jury, the sun was down on May 4th. Miss Hitter didn't see what happened, Mr. Good didn't see what happened, and Mr. Bennett didn't see what happened. But every single eyewitness did see something else. A speedboat. A third boat on the river going faster than everyone else. A third boat that Dr. Neer didn't take into account when she gave her opinion. A third boat that could have caused Mr. Hunter's death. Let's talk about why Captain Dawson wasn't reckless. To prove recklessness, the state has to show you that Captain Dawson consciously disregarded a risk of harm and that she substantially deviated from acceptable standards of conduct. They told you today, in opening statement and closing, that Captain Dawson was worried about a late fine. You heard from Captain Dawson today that she wasn't concerned that she could make up the money if she was early on a next shipment. And you heard her say that this was a shipment that she was taking to Tennessee. You heard her say that her boats go an average of 6 miles per hour. Members of the jury, taking a shipment from Indiana to Tennessee at 6 miles an hour, that's a multi-day shipment. The state wants you to believe that Captain Dawson consciously and plainly disregarded a risk of harm so she could shave 30 minutes off her travel time for a multi-day shipment. That's not reasonable. That's the state's attempt to blame someone for a tragedy. And Captain Dawson didn't substantially deviate from acceptable standards of conduct either. You heard Mr. Bennett say today that he was bored because their boat was going so slow. You heard that she adhered to the slow no wake guidelines. You heard that she turned off autopilot and took the curve by hand when she was supposed to. She's been safe for her entire life on the river. She was safe that night too. In order to convict Captain Dawson of leaving the scene, the state has to show you both that she hit that boat and that she left the scene knowing there was a high probability that she knew she'd injured another boat. Members of the jury, they can't even show you a high probability of that in court today. And you know she said that she hit a log that night, and she said she hit a log today. The state's trying to send her to prison for homicide, and all they have is guesses about what happened that night. Guesses aren't good enough, and they certainly don't prove guilt. Find her not guilty on all counts. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Connors. Ms. Bolter?
Yes, Your Honor. May it please the court, counsel, members of the jury. 3 eyewitnesses all felt and heard these same things in the same area at the same time. These aren't guesses. Regardless of what this defendant tells you, these are the facts. Find her guilty. Thank you.
Ms. Bolter? Well, congratulations. I thought that was excellent. You both certainly deserve to be here. Here's what we're going to do, according to the script I have. I'm going to ask you about rules violations just a second, but we're going to let the scoring judges depart to fill their ballots. While they're doing their ballots, you're going to do your star award for best attorney and best witness. Then we're going to come back. We're going to have short critiques. I know that you've heard many critiques. I know that you have a short time span to do your next performance. I know all that, but these folks are very experienced on a national level, and you should hear their 1 or 2 minutes. And then we're going to wind things up. So does anyone have a substantial rules violation you want to point out to me?
The state doesn't.
Neither does the defense.
That's good. I didn't see one either. Okay, scoring judges, go do your ballots and complete them and send them in. I'm going to do the same thing. And then we're going to come back here and you guys are going to do your star awards and then we're going to come back for critiques. I should have written all this down, I know. Okay, a few minutes, bye.
Okay, so would you like us to do our star awards first? Or are we supposed to do it now? I'm sorry.
Well, why are you still on the screen?
Are we not supposed to be doing the star awards? I'm so sorry.
You are supposed to be doing this. I confused you, didn't I? Okay.
Sorry.
You do your star awards now. We're doing our ballots and then we're all going to come back and do the other stuff.
My apologies. Yes.
Okay. Oh, that's all right. I know I confused. Go ahead. Mr. Frazier?
Yes, I'm about 80% done.
All right, well, we will just wait for another minute. So teams, you're conferring about your star award and award them after the critique, it says on my list.
I'm just checking my totals here. Be sure I got everything in.
When you click submit, if you've forgotten something, it'll take you back to it. I know because I did.
Okay.
All right, teams, are you?
Judge, I hit submit. I did not pick a second and third best attorney or best witness. I picked a first of each. Very difficult to go to number 2 and 3, but I picked the best.
Did it go through?
Yes, it says thank you.
Well, then
your submission has been received.
Then that's good. That's good. All right, are the teams ready?
Yes, Your Honor.
We don't have any little indication that tells us when you're out there, or at least I don't see it. We're going to start with Mr. Frazier here. We're aware we have 1 or 2 minutes each, and we're aware that you have a tight schedule, so we're not going to ask you to, redo the theme of your case, but we do have some comments. Go ahead, Mr. Frazier.
These are very powerful teams, very strong teams. Wow. I saw a lot of passion in the closing. I think that's important. Good cross-exam. Witnesses were very good. Very, very impressed. Very close. Very, very close. You're representing your state very well. And good luck to both of you. You're representing your state very well. Thank you.
Mr. Tate?
Yeah, I mean, I echo that. I have not been doing this as long as Mark and Chris, but I can tell you, you're 2 of the best teams that I've ever seen. I do it normally locally when the tournament's here in town, and I could just say, fantastic job to all of you. I've seen attorneys do worse than you, so you did a great job.
Well, we've all seen bad attorneys, Brandon. Mark?
Yes, thank you. Excellent work, everyone. I like the use of theory and theme on both sides, in both the openings and closings, and the little sort of flip on the theme by the defense at the end. I echo what the other judges said about the strong cross-examination performances by the witnesses in particular. Just always remember attorneys, when you're on cross-examination, try to stick only to leading questions. It sort of throws us off a little bit when we hear some open-ended or non-leading questions on cross. But again, excellent work and good luck going forward in this tournament.
I'm going to make some sort of specific comments, but very briefly. First of all, there should have been redirect and recross in this case. There's a lot of good cross-examination going on, and then you let your witness go. So just be thinking on your feet. When they call for redirect, you need to do something to rehabilitate whatever it was you heard. I think that's important here. Objections. When you make an objection, you know the judge is going to come back to you again, and some of those responses were weak. So if you're going to make an objection, most of these objections are already prepared. You need to have a good, strong reply to what the other attorney says. Okay, don't make a weak response when the judge comes back to you and you're the one that made the objection to start with. There were very good transitions here. Try to get rid of the bad habit that I have, which is saying "and" before every question. You're not so far along the road that you can't just stop doing that. So stop doing it. Believe me, it will stay with you the entire time. I know. My final piece of advice is you've gotten good advice because you wouldn't be here in the nationals if you hadn't, and you've heard a lot of evaluators, a lot of judges give you advice. The advice you need to take now is the advice that your coach gives you. They trained you, they brought you here, they know what you can do, and they will take you to the next round as well. I thoroughly enjoyed this. This is one of the best rounds I've ever heard, and I have heard, well, let's just say a lot of them. Congratulations to all of you, and good luck to all of you.
Thank you so much.
All right. You get to award your star awards now, right? Okay. We don't have this in my state, so go ahead, do it.
So all of the attorneys were amazing, so hard. But we thought Maya in particular was just absolutely amazing, flawless. And then as a witness, we thought that Lindsay was so factual. She knew everything, and it was just, she was amazing.
Thank you.
And from our side, you all are absolutely fantastic as well. This was such a fun round. It was very close. We really, and in particular, Lucy Bolter, we thought you were really, really, really fantastic. Your closing was incredible. And then in terms of witnesses, Lauren Nonin-Moker with a K or, okay. Thank you. We thought you were fantastic. You held up really well on cross. You knew everything really well. You seemed very professional. So thanks you guys for such a great round.
Thank you too. This was absolutely so amazing. And thank you to the judges all who participated in giving up almost most of their weekend, Wednesday to Saturday or Thursday to Saturday, just to watch us. So thank you so much.
Well, we do it because we love it. All right, goodbye. Do good. Keep working hard. Okay.
Thank you.
Everybody.
Thanks.